Hello, Dr. Sada, can you hear me?
Yes, Patty.
Yeah, we can hear you
Loud and clear.
loud and clear.
That is good. I just tried to. Apologies. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I think we'll be ready to start soon. I see the room is filling up. Shall we give it one more minute? Can you hear me, Dr. Sada?
Yes, we can hear Patty.
Okay, super. Thank you. Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, Patty, we can hear you.
Okay, super. I think we are running behind time, and with the room filled up with 30 participants, maybe it's a good time for us to start. For those who can turn on their videos, please feel free to do so. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to this forum. And today we are hosted by the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, the Center for Research on North America, and the Migrant Forum in Asia. Really delighted that after a skip of 1 year, we are back at the e-conference. This is our fourth e-conference, and really delighted that you could join us. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know if the recording has already started or we have it already being transmitted live. Dr. Sada, I will wait for your cue before we welcome everyone in officially.
Yes, Patty, tell me.
Okay. Super. Good afternoon, good evening. We are glad that you could find the time to join us today and tomorrow. This is a 2-day conference that is being hosted by JRFDT, CSUN, and MFA. I think we're sitting at a very interesting time with a lot of, well, 2 months to the end of the year, but also at a time when we, even though in some parts of the world we say it's post-COVID, there is quite a lot, I think, that COVID has done to shape some of our daily living. And in the space of governance, migration, we do have a lot to talk about and to say. And through the different forum, through the different activities, not just these 3 organizations, but many other partnerships, I think we have been able to unpack some very interesting aspects on thematic areas. Just to give a little bit of background to where we are, some of you may be new and wondering, why it's called the 4th conference. And like we said, last year we didn't have it, but the year before we had hosted it. It's a space and a forum where we bring researchers together. We started the process all the way back in July, and we will have a run through of where we are today. We have 70 scholars that will be joining us, presenting papers in 9 thematic sessions. Very exciting sessions, looking at what very exciting papers, and those who have been in the background have really been able to not just go through what these abstracts look like, but also have received some research papers, and we're looking forward to a publication post-conference. But on that, maybe to just kick off our opening today, so just to note that we have an opening today, and we are going to go straight into the sessions after the opening. And then for tomorrow, again, we'll continue with the thematic sessions and have a closing session. So we hope that you have made time to join us today and tomorrow. And with that, I pass over to Professor Binod Kadria, who is the president of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, to open today's conference. Professor Binod.
Thank you, Paddy. It's nice to see the smiling faces. Although I can't see all the faces, I can only read names. And so I will join you in requesting them again to open their videos. I would like to refer to what Paddy said, that there are new people here, and she explained why it is 4th e-conference. Well, I think it is always a pleasure to meet new people. In college and universities, we used to call it the Freshman's Day, which was very gender-biased terminology. So I'll say freshmen and women at the beginning of the new semester or a new academic year in universities and colleges, and to appreciate the presence of the old guards. And I think we do have very senior people among the audience here. And I'm reminded, and my colleague, I stand here, I'm sitting, but I stand in support of all of you. And I can see that my co-organizers, MFA, from MFA, William Goyes is there, Camelia is there. And last month only, I was in Kuala Lumpur at a conference hosted by William, Justice for Waste Theft. And that's where I was asked to give some kind of reflections towards the end of the conference. And impromptu, I said that, of course, it is an international conference, but looking at the profile of the participants, I prefer to call it an intergenerational conference. And here too, I think that applies very much here. If we look at the age profile of the participants here, I think barring the last generation, the Alpha generation, which was born after 2012, I think all the other 4 or 5 generations, starting with 1947, are present here. The baby boomers, the generation X, Gen Y, Gen Z, or Z, as they call it, or millennials, are here. And that, I think, is the great strength of any interaction, any conference, because we are then trying to bridge our thinking, our thoughts, our perspectives across generations, which is, normally called the generation gap. So bridging the generation gap is one objective of a conference like this. And it is my privilege to welcome you all on behalf of the GRFDT and my co-hosts, MFA, CSUN, and all the organizers. So what I'm trying to say here is that, as Paddy also said, post-COVID, I mean, can we call it post-COVID? Or are we still in COVID? Because that the pandemic is still raging many parts of the world, and it's trying to make a comeback, and how to combat that, how to govern that, how to manage migration, because migration has been one of the very serious casualty of COVID-19. I would like to say that perhaps I think our number of our participants is slowly growing, and I'm glad to see that they cut across from different countries. Paddy has mentioned that we have 70 presenters, but we have many more people who are participating today. As the pandemic is still trying to make a comeback, what kind of perspective change we might have, what kind of governance change we need to have, and what kind of opportunities and challenges that we need to understand. I think all these are very much important in terms of affecting the mobility or also the immobility in newer ways, the reach of which is through this platform, the e-platform is perhaps, I don't know whether it is the second best or the first best. When I was looking at the title of this conference, and it says the fourth e-conference. Now, that makes me think, what is the default description? Is it going to become the predominant mode of exchange communication tomorrow, and in-person would be the secondary mode? In that sense, perhaps we would call it the conference rather than e-conference. And when it is in person, perhaps that would have an objective. So you see how, the whole perspective can completely somersault. It can make a, 360-degree turn. In welcoming you, I'm not alone. I must say that I wear multiple hats. I am from the GRFDT, as Paddy has mentioned, but I'm also wearing another hat of another organization as a co-convener of the Metropolis Asia Pacific. And here I would like to say that cocooned in this rectangular screen before you, where I can see some of you and I can see some of the names, I would say that at this fourth international conference, I have received many emails which are appreciative of the organization of this conference, of the content, and are trying to welcome you, trying to encourage you all. And these are, I would say, the co-convener of the Metropolis Asia Pacific, Imelda Nicholas from Philippines, has sent her message of welcome. Although not all of them may be able to join us because of the time difference. For example, very senior colleague, Richard Bedford, Emeritus Professor of Waikato University in New Zealand. It's past midnight for him, so he must be in deep sleep. So we cannot expect that he would be with us, but his wishes are, his note of welcome is inspiring. Similarly, my friend of long term, Professor Wiley, herself a permanent migrant in the US from China at Arizona State University. At the moment, she is visiting another university within the United States. Dr. Martin Greiger of Carleton University in Canada, Professor Brenda Yo of National University of Singapore, presently touring US and Canada. So we see that out of these 4 or 5 names that I have mentioned, 2 of them are in their countries of origin. and the other two are not in their country of origin. They are in a different country, in a third country, in a transit country, and so on. And that gives us the canvas of this particular conference where we are participating today, covering all the relevant spaces of our discourse over these 2 days. I guess the participants, you all are also as speakers, as listeners, paper presenters, chairs, rapporteurs, organizers, and of course, not last but not the least, the migrants. I can see that in the program, and you very soon listen to migrant experience, lived experience, are participating from different spaces, either in their own countries of origin, a destination country, a transit country. And so we find that we look forward to listening to all of them and also being listened to. So I say that diaspora is today a generic term. It used to be as people who were homeless in a way, not having a homeland, and were trying to find foothold in another space. It is no longer the same nomenclature. Diaspora is very inclusive term nowadays. It includes, starting to include even students. Temporary migrants are also being encapsulated in that terminology. So we need to understand that what COVID-19 has done. That's a new intervention, a natural intervention that has brought a sea change in our entire dialectics that we come across. Many of you, I was looking at the 70 presentations, their titles and so on that Patty had mentioned, 70, and they come from different countries. I see that some of them, these presentations are going to be conceptual as an academic exercise, and others are applied experiences of a case study. So we find a lived experience of a migrant, a returnee, or we will find that sharing a theoretical construct or a model or an empirical data or information that I think are all complementary to each other. That's where I think the uniqueness of conferences like this we find captivating us. All these are parts of our deliberations over the 9 sessions. It's very packed, very, very packed program, as you can see, and there are parallel sessions. I don't like parallel sessions because I can't make the correct choice. I land up into the wrong session always. So that's a dilemma, but we don't have, an alternative to that. We have to shortcut against time. And that, I think, is a challenge before us, how to make that choice. I welcome you to join all of us and exchange your ideas, exchange them and learn from each other. The collective outcome of these endeavors would be much more than all of them put together individually. I welcome you to make the choices before you, whether to listen or to speak, or to do both, or to support and endorse, or to question and disagree. The dialectics of the debate, creating the wisdom, will be really exhilarating and something for us to carry home. And with this, I wish you a very enjoyable, fruitful, and an interaction that you remember for a long time to come. These words, I will pass it back to Patty. Thank you.
Professor Vinod, thank you very much for sharing in and welcoming us with those remarks into the conference. Indeed, the family of GRFDT, MFA, and CSAN family friends, scholars in this space, researchers, practitioners, migration, we would say migration experts, but I think these days we say migration related, because we know that migration touches on different aspects of our society, and even in the academic space, we know that it touches on different faculties as well, and different thematic areas. So everyone is welcome. We notice that the room is filling up, so it's important to just welcome you again to this 4th International e-conference organized by GRFDT, CSAN, and MFA with the theme Migration, Governance, and COVID-19 Perspectives, Policies, and opportunities, and as well as looking at the challenges. And speaking of challenges, I would like to hand the floor over to William Goyce from the Migrant Forum in Asia, who will walk us through, telling us a bit more about some of those reflections, reflecting back to where we have been, but also putting us into that challenging spot as he eloquently does as usual. William, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Patty, and let me first begin by thanking all the co-organizers, and just to say, it's a massive effort to put something like this together, even if it is online. It doesn't make life any easier if it was face-to-face with 47 international delegates coming to a face-to-face conference. Online is just as, if not more, time consuming. So thank you to all the co-organizers who have spent time, a lot of waking time, sleeping time, free time spent in just making this happen. So thank you so much for that. Thank you, because sometimes we enter into projects in our lives, and we enter into them with a certain passion, with a certain commitment. Sometimes with an idea of just trying something different, trying something new. And it's only when it is happening and it is upon us, and sometimes after it has happened, do we realize the significance of what transpired. And for me, this is one of those moments. You know, when I look back 2020, when we did this one, it was a time when there was so much of fear in the world, and people were shut down in their homes. There were lockdowns. There was so much of uncertainty. And in the world of migration, everything had basically come to a standstill. And it is in this kind of atmosphere of fear, hesitation, sense of insecurity, wondering what's going to happen, when will things open up, hoping for things to open up faster. It was at this moment in 2020 when a group of us came together and to say almost that we cannot let this situation bog us down. We've got to rise above this situation, and we've got to find ways of renewing our mission, recommitting ourselves, and continuing to bring innovation and change. And it's amazing how in 2020 we pulled this off. It was all new in terms of technology. It was all new in terms of what needs to be done in terms of process. But we were able to pull off a massive event in 2020. More than 600 scholars presented papers to us, which also showed the thirst for knowledge around migration that is being generated and delivered. Out of those 600 kind of papers, we finally had to narrow down to something like 300, and we had that e-conference. And it was great. There was another William who opened that. He is no longer with us, but another William Swing, at the former DG of the IOM, who himself was a pioneer in so many ways. And I would like to dedicate today's opening and today's session, these 2 days, to a man like him, his spirit of always being ready and gung-ho to take something forward. No idea was too small. No initiative was too small. No individual research work or paper was too insignificant. For him, anything works, make it work. He was that kind of a man, as long as I knew him. So I would like to, in some ways, dedicate today's sessions and tomorrow's sessions to his memory. With regard to the papers, the themes that we carried out were so varied last year, from climate change to migrant rights, diaspora, race, labor, detention. There was a varied amount of themes last year, and a report of that will be coming out soon. This year, we've got something like 70 papers. We had quite a number of applicants this year as well, after this break of last year, 2021. And again, we see a plethora of papers coming up, which again only gives testimony to the work that is happening on the ground on migration, which only shows it would be fantastic if we were able to find, how people do the kind of charts of increasing charts kind of thing, increasing numbers. It would be fantastic to see how research around migration has grown over the years, quantifiably and qualitatively. And I would say never before, I would say with confidence, never before have so much knowledge been generated on migration and what's happening in the world of migration. And if we were just to take that amount of work that is being put together in this in terms of research, it definitely gives then testimony to the point that maybe we are on the cusp of a new way of understanding human community and human mobility. And these research papers that we are working on, that you are working on, I think this is all the capital, all the resources that is going to shape in a certain way the world that is emerging, the world that we need to look at. And I think it's so important. That's why that you are part of this journey with us. And I want to thank you for being part of the journey with us. We are at a time, and this is the contradiction. We are at a time where so much knowledge is being generated, and yet so little political will is accompanying that. If you look at any mainstream media today, you will see how little in terms of political innovation, political thinking, political commitment is being made towards migration and understanding this world that is emerging before us, the world that is supported by the work that you are doing. And that's why your work becomes all the more important. And I will therefore end with this. I see some people in the chat room today with whom I worked for years, and I'm glad that they are there. I'm making special reference in some ways to Patrick Taran, who I know for many years and who has been many years doing this kind of work of producing evidence from the ground. So thanks, Patrick, for continuing to be with processes like this. And of course, my own understanding of migration in many ways was when I first read the India migration report, which Dr. Binod put together. So I'm indebted to, in certain ways, understand the understanding of mobility to Dr. Binod. So I think the work that you are doing is so pivotal. And I will ask you, because I will be honest, while we have created this platform for you to share your work, I think we as organizers will still need to look at how to leverage this. We need to be able to leverage knowledge and not only give space for the generation of knowledge. I'm saying this because I know if we are going to make this shift when knowledge becomes wisdom and wisdom becomes practice, then we will have to leverage your work. And I would like to make that commitment myself today on behalf of our co-organizers. I'm sure we will continue to think of this, but I like to also put this challenge and invitation to you as well. Is the knowledge that is generated between today and tomorrow through the papers that you have done, if you have ideas of how we can leverage knowledge, let us know. I will look for it in the spaces that I and we as co-organizers engage in. So one big space is the Global Compact on Migration, where there is a lot of space to discuss evidence-based research and to leverage evidence-based research, and that we will continue to do. Another space is the Global Forum on Migration and Development, And there are people like Raj, Binod, Paddy, myself, who have been with these processes for years, including Patrick. They are not very promising spaces at times, and sometimes we leave them more disappointed than we had expected to leave. But we continue to be in those spaces, and we continue to leverage in those spaces. So in these spaces also, your papers are something that would be very, very useful for us to look at. Intergovernmental spaces, whether it is at the regional level or at the sub-regional level. I'm thinking of the ASEAN Summit, ASEAN Civil Society Forum that is happening right now. And my colleague is actually going through the list of papers to see if any of them are on social protection for migrant workers, because that is the big theme that we are trying to raise in the ASEAN intergovernmental process, social protection for migrant workers. So any papers on that would be very useful for us in leveraging knowledge. And then at the national level, if you need any support in your paper in leveraging it as knowledge at the national level to direct, guide, or support national level policy making on migration, feel free to reach out to us. Our work involves working at the national level, a ground-up approach, and we'd be happy to make whatever connections we make, whatever connections we can, and link you up with whatever networks we have at the national level to make sure that your knowledge that you have generated, that you have freely shared like this in an open space, finds ways beyond which you could have imagined, so that this knowledge, like I said, transforms itself, becomes wisdom, and wisdom becomes practice. Thank you so much for being with us.
William, thank you. And as usual, we are always up for the challenge, or rather, we're not even sure sometimes the challenge you have put us up to. But I like how you have put it, not only that it's an individual challenge, but it is indeed a people's challenge, and giving us those pointers of, where we can actually take it up on the global space, on the regional space, and on the national, at the national level, and in terms of how we leverage this knowledge. And also just wanted to echo in what, connecting to what Professor Binod talking about parallel sessions where we can't be in different spaces at the same time. I often feel the same as well, where we'd like to be able to sit in different spaces and engage, but that's the power of the community that we have here with us. So glad that we could have the room filling up. And thank you again. I also just take note to notice all the chairs of the various sessions, of the 9 sessions. Thank you to all the chairs that are here present with us. We know you have quite a great task in the next 2 days in engaging in those thematic discussions, and we're looking forward to listening to some of your reflections tomorrow. So thank you for all the chairs. And again, once again, thank you to the members of the organizing committee who have joined us today at the opening ceremony for the 4th International E-Conference on Migration Governance and COVID-19, where we're looking at perspective, policies, and opportunities as well as challenges. And at this juncture, I think it's a good point for us to understand a little bit more about the conference itself. And as I introduce Professor Camelia Tigao from CSUN, she will also do the honor, as Professor Binod and William had put it. We do have a canvas here set before us, and the part of that bright colors that we have on that canvas is the reality of migrants' experiences. So after sharing with us what the conference is about, we will be able to hear from 2 migrant experiences, and she will introduce Samuel Kisitu and Mona Hoisan much more than I am able to. And with that, I hand over the floor to Professor Camelia. Could we just make sure we unmute Professor Camelia so she's able to speak? Thank you, Dr. Sada.
Hello, good morning, everyone. We are already behind the time and we are just starting, but I hope you can hear me well. Apologies for these circumstances. I would like to welcome you in the name of the Center for Research on North America from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Of course, we are organizing this conference for the second time, and of course that the topic is very timely. Its impact on migration has been very much studied, and I would like to say just one thing about the last conference. I am proud to remind you that the call for papers that we had in that opportunity has changed into a book. We call that book Migration, Diasporas and Sustainable Development, Perspectives from the Americas. And this book was coordinated by Professor Sarananda Sahu and colleague William Goyce from Migration Forum Asia. This book will be published soon in Spanish. It's called Migración, Diásporas y Desarrollo Sostenible, Perspectivas desde las Américas. It includes 11 papers that were presented at the conference in 2020 with authors from Colombia, India, Mexico, Peru, and the US. So we strongly encourage you to submit the papers this time as well, to be considered for publication in our website and in our academic review, Migration and Diasporas, an Interdisciplinary Journey. So I would, of course, like to thank all the scholars and students and migration practitioners who are joining us today. I will also introduce my friend, Mona Hossaini. I say friend because we've shared her experience as a migrant a month or two ago. Mona Hossaini is now in Sweden as a refugee, but she's working as a refugee practitioner herself, and she would let us know more about her experience. I don't know if Samuel Kisitsu is here. I don't see him, but anyway, let's start with Mona Hossaini, please. Let's go.
Thank you, Dr. Camilo, and hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this valuable conference. I'm Mona Hossaini, as Dr. Camilo also mentioned. Now I'm in Sweden as a new diaspora generation of Afghanistan. Based on the last year's massive evacuation, also I have been evacuated to Sweden as part of my experience with organization which I was working. I also worked as a research and policy expert in area of migration and decision making, which basically, when I was in Afghanistan, I was eager to know how family are making decision for the migration, which was interesting for me to see what dimension is forcing them to take that decision. But that is suddenly happened for me myself to be migrant, but it was kind of forced migration. And it's been second time I have been migrated to a country. In the first time when I was so small and I was so young, during the civil war, we were migrated to Iran as part of that massive migration flow. So I have been in Iran for 14 years. And after that, I decided to come to my country and take a part in the development of the country. And I have also started my work from 2004 till 2021. And but after takeover of the Kabul by the Taliban forces, there was a massive of uncertainty in the life of Afghan people, especially women activists. So I forced to flee the country and seek asylum in another country. And now I'm in Sweden, and that is kind of, I'm entitled in a refugee policy, and which was kind of a special proposal for us. I myself didn't go through the different process of migration and asylum seeking because I was working with Swedish government, so I came. And But for other refugee, which we were during our research, which we were doing, it's the process of asylum seeking is totally uncertain, is losing the time, and it's losing the chances of going to other process. So, but for myself, it was kind of easy kind of asylum seeking, because this new diaspora, it was kind of brand new from Afghanistan, and every country were seeking to have them, because those people are having the more knowledge and experience, and the country needs to fill them to some places. And it's been 1 year I'm here. I could find myself in a society, and I could adjust myself in the society because of the knowledge which I had, because of the experience which I had. But when I came here, I would to see the difference between new diaspora and old diaspora, and those people who are still in uncertain situation. So when I'm seeing these two different kind of things, the new diaspora is quite kind of, they're showing resistance to integrate in the society. And as part of myself, I want to be in society, but in my mindset, I'm not going to be integrated into society, because I feel like I should start from the beginning. But I have already done my education before, I had my experience, but it's starting from the beginning is kind of is making me to not be integrated in the society. But for the old diaspora, when I saw them, they also start from the beginning. But for them is a kind of excitement. Every time is excitement, because they have never had that opportunity to be in the society. Now they are getting education. Women are getting the freedom. They are enjoying some opportunity here, and for them is kind of excitement than ours. And when I'm also discussing this issue with the other diaspora in other part of the countries, it's the same experience, and all of them, they are telling no, it's so tough for us to see ourselves to live in these countries for a long period. So that is kind of thing which I'm thinking for the new research should be focus on that, because that kind of things is really interesting, because it's not just because of Afghans. There might be some other issues also, but always the diaspora and migration was kind of to see those people who will to migrate to some extent, but there was not so much focus on the forced migrant who were really forced, not those people who assume they forced. But I'm thinking we have to, there should be some kind of opportunity to doing that research and to see and to adjust some policy based on the needs of the new diaspora, especially Afghans after this evacuation, massive evacuation. And for I don't know how much time I have, so I don't want to just take all other speakers' time.
A minute more, Mona, if possible, but that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. And for overall generation of refugee and those people who being in asylum for a long time, there is always kind of uncertainty in their life, because sometimes the sense of belongingness in the host country is very, questionable. How we as a refugee can have the sense of belongingness to the country which we are living, and with different culture, with different language, and with new lifestyle and everything. And this has always been a challenge for all the refugee and all the asylum seekers. And but for my recommendation is that if there should be an opportunity to do research and to do more focus on the policy perspective. It should be on the how these refugees can see themselves in the host countries and how they can see themselves valuable in these host countries, and how this policy can help them to give that sense and understanding for them. So that was my last point. Right. Thank you for having me here. So I put, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mona, for sharing this experience from your perspective as a migrant from Afghanistan, and today you're sitting in Sweden. And I think it's really very interesting to hear about how that journey has never been static, isn't it? And I think that there's, at the same time, while you've had these new experiences, new adventures, but the kind of challenges that come in a way questioning a lot of what you have known before. Like you have said, you had experience, you had knowledge before taking on the journey as a migrant, and how that is put into question. And I think linking it to what you have said in terms of that recommendation, and it's a recommendation, I think, for us in the research space and also in the civil society space, to say, can we look a little bit more into what that journey actually looks like? And so I think it's a call for those who are sitting and have been thinking about a topic. You can feel free to dig into that. And like William said, we have various opportunities for us to engage all this knowledge that is generated from these spaces so that we could contribute to the policy space, but also contribute to the advocacy space. We're looking forward to hearing more migrant experiences in tomorrow's session. We've actually invited an author of a book coming out of West Africa, and he's currently living in Europe, who will share with us what his journey has looked at as a migrant. But at the same time, I think a lot that has been shared from Mona's side, talking about issues that are related to uncertainty, issues related to coping, this value of the migrant who is resistant, but at the same time, who's vulnerable. And at the same time, trying to understand how what you came with in your suitcase, what you came with in your bag, that doesn't remain valid in this new environment. And how does that new environment integrate new migrants? What's the role of the diaspora in that particular space, but also that longing for home? How are we really navigating that space and understanding what's happening around the whole of diaspora? I think it's also been very interesting from Mona's story, because we have a session actually that will look at forced migration. So for those who are also interested to hear a bit more about research that is being done in this area, you are welcome. And on that juncture, we are 10 minutes, or is it 50, more than 50 minutes, I think, behind schedule to start the first session, the first and the second session. So we welcome you all to continue staying in this space, or maybe I think I should ask my colleague, Dr. Sadanan, to come and share with us how will we proceed for session 1 and session 2. So who is staying in this session for session 1 and who is going on to session 2 as we wrap up the opening. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I hand over the floor to Dr. Sadanan.
Yes, I think Divya, can you manage the next few minutes? Dr. Amba Pandey will be joining very soon.
Sure, sir.
Now, okay.
Sure. And also, sir, I'm sharing the session 2 link in the chat so that anybody who wants to listen to the other papers that's happening in this session 2 can join in through this link.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So Divya, session 1 remains in this room, if I'm not mistaken, and session 2 have a link.
Parallel session 1 is the same room, and parallel session is happening in the link that I have just shared in the chat.
Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see just as much participation in both sessions. And now I will hand over to the chair of session 1 to take over the floor. Over to you, Divya, Dr. Divya.
Thank you so much, Paddy. This is an interesting development because I'm also presenting in the session. But for the time being, until Amba ma'am joins, I'm going to chair the session. So this is the first experience for me. But I'm happy to take that position of hosting the session until Professor Amba Pandey joins us. We have an interesting Uh, now, I hope I'm audible now. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, that was electricity cut that happened. Yeah, so we have a wide diversity of papers that will be presented in this session. I hope our PPT, if they have any, and we'll start in the order that is there in the schedule. So we have as the first presenter. Just give me a minute. Yeah. We have Evangeline O'Katibak. I hope Evangeline is here. Evangeline, since we are running out of time, it's already 15 to 20 minutes late, I would request you to right away start with your presentation. And you will get 6 minutes answer session. Oh, okay. Sahu sir, can you unmute Evangeline? Could you please try once?
Okay, good evening, everyone. All right, I prepared the presentation. I don't know if I'd be able to share my presentation, my screen. Okay, screen sharing is disabled.
What about now?
Okay, all right. Okay, good evening, everyone. Okay, so this is the title of my presentation. So Health and Social Security Systems Literacy of Filipino Migrant Workers in Singapore. This is a scoping review which draws from a larger project entitled Scoping Study on the Health and Social Security Systems Literacy of Filipino Migrant Workers in East Asia. And my colleagues, my co-investigators on the project are also here in this session, and they'll be presenting later on. So, okay, in order to keep to the time, I will be reading through my presentations, but through my presentation, I'll be happy to respond to questions once the floor is open for them. All right, so these are the aims of the paper that I'll be presenting: to locate the situation of Filipino migrant workers in Singapore concerning their literacy on health and social security systems in both host and sending country, and uncover the current scope of knowledge on health and social security systems literacy of migrants, and also to highlight the gaps in the current scope of literature. Now, why Singapore? Oh, sorry, before that, why Singapore? There are, for me, twin characteristics of Singapore that draws a lot of migrants to the city-state. First is their global city status, and their continuing desire to remain as such, as well as the present demographic challenge in the country. It has a very low fertility rate, and yeah. Okay, so these are the working definitions that we had for the project on health security, social security, as well as migrant literacy on health and social security. Again, I won't be reading through this for time constraint, because of time constraints. So I'll proceed. So migrant workers in Singapore. This is from this data is from the National Population and Talent Division of Singapore. This is the most recent one that they have. This is as of June 2022. So Singapore has 5.64 million people comprising 4.07 million citizens and permanent residents, and 1.56 million non-residents. Non-residents include foreign workers across all visa categories. In the Singapore context, they call it PAS. So if you look at the green share in the pie, you have employment pass. I'll be explaining this in a bit. So PAS means visa, again, in the context of Singapore. Non-residents also include their dependents and international students. So among the many foreign nationals in Singapore are a sizable number from the Philippines. They are called migrant workers from the Philippines are called overseas Philippine workers. So from here on, I will be referring to them as OFWs. Okay. All right. So there are three visa categories for migrant workers in Singapore, and I'll be explaining this each of these. So first, E-Pass or Employment Pass, which is about 11% of there's about 11% of the non-resident population in Singapore. They are the foreign professionals, there's the so-called global talents, the foreign professionals, highly skilled, highly educated migrants. And then we have the one in the middle. Okay, so the S-Pass, or the skilled pass or S-Pass holders, the mid-level skilled workers. And then finally, the work permit holders. These are the low-waged migrant workers. And from their data, their population, they comprise about 40% of the non-resident populations in Singapore. So they are the work permit holders or low-wage earners, usually confined in domestic service, construction, marine, shipyard, and processing sector, and the so-called non-CMP sectors. They're not allowed to bring their families with them. They're not allowed to apply for permanent residency. For domestic workers, the majority of which are females, they have biannual medical examination to check for pregnancy because they're not allowed to be pregnant. They're not allowed to marry Singapore nationals as well as permanent residents. Okay, so for OFWs in the Philippines, Singapore hosts one of the largest Filipino communities outside of the Philippines. So I don't know if you are able to see my presentation, but I'm presenting the share of OFWs in the world. So the majority of OFWs are in Asia. The traditional destination country for most OFWs is Saudi Arabia, but Singapore is the sixth most. So in 2020, this is the most recent data. Singapore was the sixth most popular destination country for land-based OFWs with 162,223 thousand Filipino workers. And the popularity of Singapore as a migration destination among Filipinos can be attributed to several factors, including its high-performing economy that translates to relatively higher wages for workers, political stability, and its relative geographical proximity to the Philippines. So the Philippines and Singapore are in Southeast Asia, they're neighbor countries. All right, so for the scoping process, I will just be sharing the highlight of our findings. Okay, so while there is a considerable number of studies dealing with migrant workers in Singapore, very few have focused on the health and social security policies and programs for migrant workers in Singapore, although they may be mentioned in a few papers. Social security in Singapore is based on nationality and visa category, with only citizens and permanent residents eligible for most of this protection, healthcare included. And while there is a state-mandated employer-financed medical insurance for low-wage foreign workers in Singapore, and this is specifically concerning work permit holders, they remain excluded from laws that ensure their social protection. Okay. Finally, Singapore has yet to include its migrant workers in the government-run Universal Health Coverage or UHC systems. At present, the non-portability of migrant social security benefits remains a big concern in Singapore. And Singapore also does not have any bilateral or multilateral social security agreements with the origin countries of its foreign labor. Now, I will be, well, this is a summary of the findings from a focus group discussions that I had with 5 female OFWs in Singapore via Zoom, and also semi-structured interviews with representatives of Philippine agencies tasked to look after the welfare of OFWs. And these interviews with Philippine agencies were done, were conducted along with my co-investigators in the project. And there are 3 themes that I will be highlighting, which again are based on this qualitative part of our study, which was well, it complemented the scoping study process that we had. Number 1, there is
Dr.
literacy,
Evangeline,
high literacy. Yes.
If I may, your slide is not changing. So if it's still on the cover page.
Okay.
If you want to show us, yeah. And you have 2 more minutes left.
All right. I don't know
Thank
how
you.
to do it. No, so let me stop sharing first, and let me see if
Yeah, we could see it
okay.
now. We could see it now.
Okay. All right. So, okay, I'll continue. Again, this qualitative part of the research is it's to complement the scoping study, and there are 3 themes that I'll be highlighting from the findings that we from this FGV and interviews. First is that there is relatively high literacy and ease of access to migrant health and social security systems in Singapore. So the OFWs were not only highly literate about the migrant health and social security system in Singapore, the host country, they likewise illuminated the ease of access to these benefits. So this is in contrast to the lack of knowledge pertaining to their lack of knowledge pertaining to migrant health and social security regimes in the Philippines. There are a number of policies and programs that the Philippine state has for migrant workers. So there are compulsory membership, the insurance system, Philippine insurance system, for example. But the problem is that migrant workers are not knowledgeable about these things. They're from the end of the Philippine state, the government has been trying to reach OFWs and disseminate information regarding the benefits and protection that they offer, the state offers its migrant workers. But again, all of these efforts seem to be ineffective based on the FGV that I conducted. So OFWs lack knowledge on the health and social protection that the Philippines afford them. And the range is from 0 to just a nominal understanding of the instruments of protection, as in just nothing, or that they know that they exist, these instruments of protections exist, but they are unable to access them. Those who know about these things are not willing to access because of the difficulty of processing from registration up to filing of claims. And finally, they highlighted the importance of social networks and social media in their literacy about health and social security systems in both host and home countries. So in Singapore, state-initiated information drives play an important role in heightening the literacy of migrants in these regimes. On the Philippine side, in contrast, there is a seeming lack of action directed at not only at educating migrant workers on the benefits of the related policy instruments, but also at making them more accessible to migrants. So the lack of knowledge in this regard is bridged by social networks and the social media. The study underscores how both migrant networks and social media have been important factors in mediating the gap in the lack of knowledge of migrants regarding health and social protection. So to conclude, okay, the Philippines has always been regarded as a global model for its management of its institutionalized labor export, supported by an intricate policy frameworks and state-run bureaucracy. There is, however, limited scholarship on health and social security regimes for OFWs, including migrant workers' literacy of these programs and policies. And while health and social security for migrant workers are in place, at least from the Philippine side, the sending side, OFWs do not readily enjoy this protection.
Dr.
Some of the
Devansh.
factors to this. Okay, this is my last slide. The lack of portability of benefits, and second, the absence of bilateral agreements with host countries. And so finally, the illiteracy of Filipino migrant workers in Singapore on health and social security systems further compounds their vulnerability when they toil away from home. Precarity and risk negatively affect migrants' literacy and information-seeking behavior, while illiteracy also limits their capability to confront vulnerabilities, thus leading to a downward spiral in terms of access and health to social benefits. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Evangeline, for that very relevant paper. I think it's very important for us to conduct, as social science researchers, to conduct action-oriented, outcome-oriented research. And I could see that your research is already filling in the gap of many of the studies not having discussions on health and social security policies and programs in Singapore. So I'm sure your study is it's going to be a very relevant contribution to the knowledge, not just on knowledge production, but also in terms of policy outcome of your study. So thank you so much for this wonderful paper. And we are really sorry for rushing you. It's, since we have started a little late, let me invite Dr. Vishambarnath Prajapati. His paper is COVID-19 Migrant Death and Bereavement Compensation Policy. So I welcome Vishambarnath Prajapati. You can unmute yourself. Thank you so much, sir. You can present your paper.
Thank you, ma'am, for inviting me for this presentation. I would like first to share my PPT. Then so is it visible?
It is not.
Okay.
If you're not able to share the screen, you can present without the PPT as well, sir.
Yes, I have, but I don't know, since I am using mobile, so there may be.
Maybe then you can present without the PPT. We will listen to you.
Okay. I will send the PPT.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much.
Uh,
So, sir, you have 6 minutes to present your main arguments. Thank you.
My topic is COVID-19 Migrant Death and Bereavement Compensation Policy. Why this topic is very important for me, since I lived in those areas, which is one of the most backward areas of India, and I stay near the Bihar. So it's a kind of UP and Bihar border, and we know that in India, it's UP and Bihar which contributed in the most in the labor force. The number of UP and Bihar migrant workers is higher than any other state. So in pandemic, we have seen many kind of things which never arises before, because earlier the death was not so much part of our life, because we have never faced so much the way death has come to us. So I am trying to understand how death, like bereavement compensation policy, is very important from the point of view of these migrant workers, because due to this pandemic COVID-19, since there is data by the government of India, which BBC produced, that there are 4,47,000 COVID-19 deaths so far in India, and but the experts believe that it is more than that, and it may be 10 times more. So there is a huge number of COVID-19 deaths, and in India, US dollar $2.87 trillion economy is fueled by the labor force of around 518 million workers, which 80 to 90% who are employed in the informal sector. So there is a huge labor force which is working in informal sector. Another side, we have seen in this COVID-19 that more than even the government data is saying more than the 4 lakh people have died. So what is the important as a sociologist for me, the people who are the migrant workers moving from their own village to the urban places, now they were returning, and many of them died not only because of the COVID, but due to like the kind of situation created by the COVID. That is also very important. So many of the migrant workers not died only because of the COVID, because of the lack of the basic food they didn't get, the water, we have seen that. But even in this situation, government was not willing to compensate them even after the death. So there was a case filed by, there was a writ petition in 2021 in June that there must be compensation for COVID-19 death. My point is that even the government is talking about the migrant death, they never tried to make any kind of bereavement policy, because there is a kind of government is trying to pushing their hand from the welfare scheme, because first the government reduce the number of the COVID-19 deaths. So it's a kind of pushing their hands that we will not provide compensation to everyone. Second, they gave the explanation from the National Management Act 2005, section 12, 3, ex gratia assistant on the account of the disaster. So the problem is here that they consider only those deaths which has been recorded as a COVID-19 death. But what happened to those deaths when the people were traveling, migrating from one to another state, they lost their life? They there is no mention, there is no discussion of those deaths, and that death was also migrant death. So if there will be like bereavement policy which explicitly will narrate what kind of the disaster, what kind of the pandemics, and who will be included, then this situation COVID-19 kind of things can be sought out, because it's very reductionist views of the government that only the intervention after the Supreme Court, they try to give compensation, and even the people who were unable to like apply the application, they were unable to get the compensation, because if the person have died, who will apply for them? Though I mean, dead person cannot apply. So many of the kith and kin, they were unable to claim this compensation also, So government announced the compensation, but since there was no policy before that, and this kind of situation which generated because of COVID-19, government have failed because of two, three things I think are very important in this case. When we are talking about COVID-19, so state have some responsibility because the in Indian constitution, it has already described that that we will provide economic and the social justice and equal opportunity. So one thing is that state is reducing the compensation of those people who are already powerless, because the migrant workers doesn't matter for the government. So it's very important to see how the power decide a policy. So if there will be a lack of the like elite people will die, government will change the policy. So kind of the welfare scheme the government should introduce, they have just reduced only to the COVID-19 death, and how the families have been influenced. Many lack of the, I mean, families have faces this crisis and the kind of pain and the suffering. Government did not consider that. So if my argument is that if there will be a compensation, a government compensation policy, the people can claim that this is their rights. Otherwise, I was listening in the opening session, the Khadria sir was talking about, even we don't know that it is post-COVID or we are in COVID. So the thing is that the government is very safe. I mean, but what about this migrant death? So my basic argument, it's still I'm working on my paper because there are many stories. So I'm not making any kind of claim, but the people whom I have been surrounded by, and the government the government argument has given that we will consider only those death as a COVID-19 death where people have applied for the application which they have become. So that's very problematic as per my understanding, that if people are coming because of the migrant workers is coming from Mumbai or the Delhi or the Bangalore and they died, and this situation is created by the COVID-19. So the COVID-19, you just left behind those people, those migrant death, which happened due to COVID-19, but they were not affected by the COVID-19. We don't know they were affected or. So I think we need to think that whenever we are talking about the migrant death, we have to think about that how this government welfare schemes as a socialist republic is allied with the people's welfare or not. And I am looking that government is not very much taking their responsibility as a welfare scheme, which is the part of our constitution, that they must provide that. And second important thing is that India
could you
never
please conclude in a minute?
Yes. And second thing is that government has government intervention of the Supreme Court. So that's very unfortunate. So the two kind of things, when we are talking about COVID-19, we have to, and migrant workers, we have to think about the who is holding the power to decide that compensation should be there or not. And second important, that if we are really concerned about the migrant death, I think so globally and even the India as a national level, we have to think about we need a kind of policy which will not include only the COVID-19 affected people, but the people who has been suffered or any kind of have been like face the problems due to their spouse death or the family members death, that must also be taken into the consideration when we are talking about the government policy compensation. Thank you, ma'am, for this opportunity. And if this PPT is needed, if there will be any email, particular mail, I can send the PPT.
Sure. Thank you so much for, again, another wonderful paper, because this paper also is pointing to the very fact that we lack migrant-centric migration policies and governance mechanism, which is even in the GRFTT platform and the events that we organize with MFA and all other our partner organizations. Over and over again, this is something which we try to highlight, that there is a need for migrant-centric policies and governance mechanisms. And also very interesting point about who decides, who has the power to decide. I think power should be with migrants and migrants of all intersections. With that note, let's move to the next presentation. Presentation by Melissa R. Garabayos. This is on Filipino migrant domestic workers, health and social security systems literacy during the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome, Melissa. You have 6 minutes to present.
Okay, good evening. So this presentation is entitled Filipino Migrant Domestic Workers and the Health and Social Security Systems in Hong Kong, a Scoping Review. So Hong Kong is considered Asia's world city. It hosts many migrants across the globe, wherein the second largest ethnic group are Filipinos. Among the overseas Filipino workers, 89% are domestic workers who are considered a unique labor group. This is because, unlike other groups, their workplace and their living space are one and the same, as most live in their employer's home. Much of the existing literature about them highlight the challenges they face, such as exclusion from the public sphere, lack of opportunity to stay in that city beyond their contract period, and exclusion from benefits like education, public housing, and social welfare. Their context makes them vulnerable to different kinds of contract violations and exploitation. They are also susceptible to premature termination, leading to job insecurity. During the COVID-19 pandemic, they faced even more difficulties. They can be considered frontliners, thus they had greater likelihood of exposure to the virus. They have heavier workload and less rest and leisure time due to greater mobility and travel restrictions. Getting fired also became easier and more rampant. These circumstances point to the crucial role that health and social security measures play in protecting migrant domestic workers. To address this need, this presentation seeks to conduct a scoping review about the health and social security systems in Hong Kong and migrant domestic workers' access to health and social security related information and services. Data came from the scoping study on health and social security systems literacy of Filipino migrant workers in East Asia. For the purposes of this presentation, only Hong Kong related studies were included. In the end, 16 studies were identified, where 14 focused solely on domestic workers, while 2 also covered other OFWs, but highlighted domestic workers' concerns. In terms of findings regarding Hong Kong's social security system, 3 studies depicted the city as a favorable landscape. First, domestic workers are covered by Hong Kong's employment ordinance, which means they are entitled to their basic rights and protection as workers, including their wages and leave entitlements. Second, the Hong Kong government has tolerance for pro-foreign worker activism. During the pandemic, political activism also happened through care work, wherein migrant leaders use their connections with government agencies and NGOs to advocate for and to advance migrant domestic workers' concerns. And third, there are informal channels like migrant worker organizations, NGOs, and transnational networks that help to create better access to migrant domestic workers. 4 studies discuss Hong Kong as an unfavorable landscape to migrant domestic workers. First, there is precarity of work, as they are subject to class discrimination. During the pandemic, there were greater mobility restrictions, contract violations in terms of unpaid overtime work, and more rampant contract termination. They were also excluded from the government's financial support. Second, there are barriers to their social security help-seeking capacity, including financial challenges and hindrances in receiving support from the Philippine consulate in Hong Kong. Third, while there is political activism, the local people are regarded as aloof to the migrant domestic workers' concerns. In terms of health systems, much of the studies looked at the negative health status of domestic workers. It was found that they are at risk for various physical, psychological, and sexual health diseases. In terms of access to healthcare, findings show that a good number had no medical insurance, despite it being a requirement by law. Some studies focused on health sources of migrant domestic workers. There were professional sources like doctors and nurses, but there were more non-professional resources. This could be formal networks such as the Hong Kong government, NGOs, or migrant organizations and churches. And there were informal, non-professional resources like employers, peers, family, and the media, including social media. And it should be noted that these informal, non-professional resources may give information that may not be reliable nor verified. Several barriers to healthcare access also exist. One such barrier is discrimination, which leads to fear that they will not be treated well and will receive some standard care in hospitals. Another is problems when seeking help in Hong Kong due to lack of appropriate accommodations during recovery and due to a lack of assurance that their employers will reimburse them of their medical expenses. There are also problems when seeking help in the Philippines, like fear that their family members will worry about them and their family's lack of ability to provide care. Language and cultural differences also restrict comprehension of information. In terms of sexual health, it was found that cognitive factors exist as barriers, such as limited knowledge about sexual health issues, fear of learning about test outcomes, and many more. And there are structural barriers as well, including difficulty traversing the healthcare system, financial issues, and employment-related challenges such as long work hours. Lastly, to conclude the presentation, this scoping review showed how migrant domestic workers' line of work is a hindrance to being treated like other workers in Hong Kong. While there are laws and there are formal and informal sources of support, this fundamental and deep-seated viewpoint limits the provision of services to them and the implementation of laws that seek to protect them. These also make them at risk for abuse, contract violations, and many health issues. Accurate and timely information and programs about migrant domestic workers' rights regarding social security and health are necessary to help diminish risk. Also, it should be noted that there were no studies that investigated social security literacy among migrant domestic workers, and there were only a few studies about health literacy. There were only a few studies about social security in general. These are clear gaps in knowledge that need to be addressed as social security and health affect migrant domestic workers' everyday lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was exactly 7 minutes. Thank you for sticking to the time. And again, very interesting paper. And especially, I think for me personally, the takeaway of this paper is the whole question of the inaccessibility to not just social security programs and provisions, but also healthcare, even hygienic accommodation. And very importantly, as you have mentioned, the systemic indifference or the structural barriers in accessing all of this, including information about the programs and the rights and laws that are legal systems that are available. Thank you so much for highlighting these points. Let's move on to the next paper, which is Migration, Health and Pandemics, Discriminatory Responses and Regime Change versus Inclusive Public Health and Wellbeing. This paper is by Patrick Terrell. We welcome you to the floor, sir. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Divya, and thank you also to William for his kind words in the opening session. All of my 17 books have actually been gender-responsive co-authored products, and I want to emphasize that this paper is actually co-authored with Olga Kadisheva, who is a GMPA associate and also my partner. And we would like to attempt a very brief joint presentation in this 6 or 7 minutes that we have allocated to us. So over to Olga.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you very much to all the conference organizers for this opportunity to present our research. And I will start with saying that the COVID pandemic has disproportionately affected millions of migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless persons, as well as IDPs worldwide. But also the pandemic showed how much our interconnected, globalized, interdependent world is very much dependent on the work that migrant workers are doing, how much different sectors of economy are dependent on migrant workers, such sectors as healthcare, transportation, provision of services, agriculture, food production, distribution, as well as construction industry, commerce, and others. At the same time, many policies implemented at the beginning of the pandemics were established with little or no consideration for migrants and refugees, which resulted in excessive COVID cases, high mortality rates, unemployment, and loss of livelihoods across migrant and refugees populations. And in our research, we looked at what a coordinated, comprehensive response to the pandemic should be, what measures are needed and were needed from the very beginning to prevent the spread of coronavirus, and also the measures that would allow for people, for economies to sustain socioeconomic development on local, national, and regional levels. A few words about the methodology of the research, which we started at the very beginning of the pandemic, meaning early year 2020. So of course, we looked at a variety of literature sources, including publications by international organizations of the UN system. We looked, of course, on the reports by WHO, then papers by ILO related specifically to migrant workers. We also looked at publications by UN Women, because they did a number of research projects looking specifically at women migrant workers. And then there were other guidance documents by other international organizations, as well as regional, regional research. We also looked at academic articles, then news reports. We also looked at different levels, not just the global level and regional level, but also local level. We found that a lot of initiatives were taken, for example, by cities in different regions of the world. So all of that allowed us to develop a summary of responses that we will present in today's presentation.
I would like to jump in at this point and underline what's often missed in the discussion of COVID, migration, and the impact, which is that essentially many of the COVID-inspired restrictive measures, particularly on migrants and migration, have underlined and built a global economic disaster of epic proportions. If I look at what some of the data coming in and what some of the observers have said, the COVID-19 pandemic is having a seismic impact on the economy, with supply chain disruptions and labor shortages a big problem for businesses around the world. Supply bottlenecks and shortages of raw materials, components, and consumer goods remain widespread. One authoritative assessment by MPI highlighted, as European countries seek to revive their economies in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, an acute labor shortage in a variety of sectors risks stopping the recovery in its tracks. The labor shortages are in part attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic, its direct impacts, and the response measures. What should also be noted is other impacts of COVID have been, for example, the Great Resignation in the United States and elsewhere, where in 1 month alone last year, 4.3 million Americans quit their jobs, in part because they had to stay home to care for family sick, where they were sick themselves, or their jobs were furloughed. Just to touch on what Evangeline was referring to, in Singapore, The crunch has led to delays of construction projects by as much as a year, resulting in a surge of 30% in the price of labor and sparking worries over excessive workloads. The construction industry itself basically warned that the current workforce is already working at maximum capacity, increasing the risk of workplace incidents. In Russia, the finance minister last year noted that the construction sites in Russia were short 1.5 to 2 million workers and called the situation a catastrophic shortage. There's more detail in the report, but it comes down to saying, look, is the economy stupid? I would say, and I think we need to say, it's not just a migrant sensitive, it's a people sensitive response that's needed, and one that covers and protects the welfare of the world's population, which in fact is being, as we see across Europe and North America, already seriously challenged by inflation that's hit over 10%, which is extraordinarily high for Europe, 11% in Germany, and is approaching 8 or 9% in the US and still going up. I'll leave it at that. It's just that the consequences of labor shortages directly related to restrictions on migration are affecting everyone.
And to briefly conclude our presentation and present some of the findings of the research, we came up with a checklist of practical guidelines on COVID-19 and migrants and refugees. And these are the value, science, and experience-based policy lines and action steps on COVID-19 and migrants and refugees, taking into account the considerations that we presented. And we have a 10-point agenda. So the first is the right to health, health-related rights, healthcare, and vaccine access. The second is universal non-discrimination, inclusion, equality of treatment. Third is community support and protection measures. Fourth is immigration, movement across borders, and non-refoulement for refugees. The fifth is employment, migrant worker protection, migrant refugee entrepreneurs. The sixth is social protection, access to schooling and education. 7 is refugees, asylum seekers, status persons, IDPs, specific measures. 8 are gender-specific considerations. 9 is accurate and reliable data, information, and knowledge. And the last 10th point is recovery, building forward together. And for example, looking at the measures related to migrant workers, employment, and specifically to migrant worker protection, inclusion, we need to say that there are a number of steps that are absolutely essential, and we can say that here so first of all, to uphold strict conditionalities for and of layoffs and for departure from the country of employment, including adequate notice period, payment of all wages, salary owed, and transfer of earned social security contributions and entitlements. Then to ensure that employers comply with all national and local requirements for public health and occupational safety and health, and communicate crucial information to employees, particularly immigrant and refugees workers. The next is access where presence and availability of international workers in complementarity with national workers are required to maintain and or review production and distribution of activity to provide for needed skills, productivity, and innovation across workforces.
And
Yes.
this is just an example that
Well,
for each
yeah.
of these 10 areas, there are a number of specific recommendations, many of them based on the international normative human rights and labor standards that need to be put in place and upheld today as well as in the last couple of years, and clearly as the pandemic continues and other epidemics strike some of us down from time to time. These need to be placed, and what the article does is give both the background and a clear agenda for action. We'd like to say more, but let's leave it there to respect the time and also for the next speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Divya. Divya,
Thank
right?
you so much. Yeah, Divya.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think if from now on, at least from, I would say from 2020 onwards, we cannot talk about migration without talking about pandemic and the accessibility to health. And your paper is highlighting all of this. And also I would say this paper is actually a perfect fit to the context of the work that we do and our partner organizations that we do generally as a civil society organization, academic forum, and it's very when we think about rights-based agenda for action. I know it's easy to talk about it, but then when it comes to implementation is where I think, we need more political will and commitment, and whatever this is, if this is a new normal, I think we really have to talk about all of this. And thank you so much for bringing in that perspective to our conference. Let's move to the next participant. We have Sanjana Raghudharan here, and her paper is on understanding migrant experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome, Sanjana. The floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen.
Sure. It's visible.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Sanjana Raghudharan, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at Monmouth University in New Jersey, America. So I'd like to first start by talking about very briefly, what has been going on. I think my presentation flow, you heard from our previous presenters everything that they have said, with migrants being overrepresented in informal markets, and the impact of that, across the globe, in Europe, in America, in terms of layoffs during COVID, as you can see here on the slide. I'm not going to read everything in the interest of time. I know Divya is keeping us on check. So I'm just going to, just to give you all the highlights. In the American context, public policy, immigration policy really has clamped down on migrant rights. So, I'm just pointing out the main ones. In 1996, we had the Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. What really that did was it was enacted to strengthen illegal immigration at the border, workplace, and in the criminal justice system. So, that was like the beginning of the clamping. And then we had the Deferred Action Act for children and childhood arrivals. That was really to provide many young immigrants an opportunity to defer deportation and provide legal work authorization. But during, it really depends on the tide and the president who is being elected at that very period of time. So when President Trump was in office, he, put a stall on that. And then suddenly you have these young individuals in limbo with regards to their status. The third was really, has really been an issue, the public charge rule. It was introduced by the Department of Homeland Security. The basis was to provide immigration enforcement in terms of rejecting applications for food, healthcare, and housing services. So, migrants without documentation never had access to these services. And migrants who had status for the first 5 years also were not eligible. So that really put a clamp on it. But even migrants, their fear was so great that even migrants who were eligible de-enrolled themselves in fear of losing status. So these are all, really issues that really impact, as I'll talk about, migrant rights in New Jersey. ICE raids, I want to talk about as well. They continued during COVID, during the lockdowns, a lot more during the initial phase of COVID, but it did continue during COVID. So just overview, areas of impact on immigrants, housing, employment, access to healthcare, food security, amongst other things. Fear also was part of the issue. So in terms of my study, it was an exploratory study in collaboration with the Community Service Agency, very close to the university. I received university IRB approval. Survey was distributed via Qualtrics, with the pandemic raging over here. The agency was not comfortable doing the surveys in person because they were helping clients online and via the phone. 45 participants responded overall. I used SPSS version 28 for the data analysis. I started off with frequencies and case summaries followed by chi-square tests. Because the response rate was low, I was hoping for over 100. But with the pandemic, it was difficult to follow up with people. So response rate was low at 55 participants, and also not everyone answered every question. I'm sure as researchers, we all struggle with that. So in terms of characteristics of participants, they were mostly women, a lot of participants from Mexico, and majority of the participants have lived in America for more than 10 years. 19 participants reported being citizens, 8 having some legal status such as green card, refugee status, or some type of visa. And yeah, so in terms of my results, so it was a little all over the place, to be honest. So with regards to housing, for example, right, non-citizens were more likely to have difficulty paying rent, and this was significant. Although there was no significance noted with not in terms of other variables regarding housing and accommodation, I noted that non-citizens were more likely to be at risk of becoming homeless. So there was a trend, even though without significance. With regards to health insurance, I think it's obvious that citizens were more likely to have health insurance than non-citizens because in America, if you don't, your citizen, not just your citizenship, but also your employment is tied to your employment is tied to health insurance in this country. We do not have universal health insurance. So the citizens were more likely to have health insurance. There was no significance noted, but non-citizens were more likely to be unemployed and experience job insecurity as well. And then also they were a lot more likely to have physical and mental health issues, especially around depression. So what I'm also trying to get at over here is that, as I said earlier, the data, with certain things, there seems to be significance, but with other things, there seems to be non-significance. And I'll talk about that in the discussion. So with regards to food insecurity, it was very, very clear all over with all the variables that non-citizens were more likely to experience food insecurity, from difficulty purchasing food, not knowing whether they would have sufficient funds for next month's food bill, and also they were more likely to obtain food from food pantries. Finally, non-citizens were also more likely to feel unsafe in the community, and I'll talk more about that as well. So in terms of key barriers and challenges that participants faced, I noted, with significance, that they face challenges around employment, housing, food insecurity, language access to the internet, and to computers. So these were like questions that we asked at the end of the survey. So these were things that came up for the people that we surveyed. Now, with regards to the employment, I just want to point out that the reason why I'm finding the mixed significance is because of the nature of work. So in terms of the fields of work for citizens, they were more likely to work in community and social service occupations, healthcare practitioners and technical occupations, food preparation and related services. Non-citizens were more likely to be in construction trades, building grounds, and cleaning and maintenance. So, in terms of employment, all these that I mentioned are essential workers. So that could possibly be why that, I saw mixed results, because they were all being essential workers, they were all experiencing similar concerns. Yeah, and then what else did I want to say? Yeah, so, as a call to action, I would like to end with this. Really, we need a preparedness plan during pandemics, which is inclusive of all people, regardless of citizenship status. So I was doing some research, and there's a study that informs that only Thailand, Papua New Guinea, and Maldives included migrant groups within their national plan in terms of a preparedness plan. So really, we really do need to have this in terms of social protections for immigrants. It's a human right. And then the second piece is that a need for data collection to be inclusive of all people, as data is key for policy formulation and service implementation. So for example, our CDC over here initially were, local government organizations were not collecting data. They were excluding migrants in the data collection. So then it becomes an issue in terms of service delivery, right? When you exclude people. So I'd like to end with that. Thank you so much, Divya.
Thank you so much, Sanjana. This is again, I would say, what is again and again to be stressed is the need to collect data. Without data, we can't have evidence-based policies, which is part and parcel of GCM that we always talk about in terms of migration. So it's all connected. We are talking about this for so long, and especially with pandemic and exclusion from all sort of government aids based on citizenship wasn't something that has happened during the pandemic. It was the case before the pandemic. And I'm sure, I don't know whether, as Binod Khatria sir have mentioned in the opening session, whether we should call it we are in a post-pandemic order. Even if we are in a post-pandemic order, the situation is still the same. Exclusion is the norm and order, which many of our systems are very comfortable with. Thank you so much for highlighting that point. We'll move on to, and I'm really sorry for rushing all of you. I really want to listen to all of this in much detail. Hope to read all your paper as well. Let me invite Jocelyn Celero to present the paper on gender issues in social and health securities literacy among Filipino migrant women in Japan. Welcome to the conference. Floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I
Yes,
audible?
yes.
Yes.
We can.
Okay. Can you see my presentation slides?
It is visible. It is visible. Thank you.
So I'm trying to put it in a presentation. Okay. So good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all the participants of this conference. My first time to join here. Thank you for this opportunity to present a portion of an ongoing team research. I believe you are already familiar. My two other colleagues who presented ahead of me, looking into a scoping study on health and social security systems literacy among Filipino migrant workers in East Asia. And my contribution to this project is the Japan context, the Japan case. No, the migration of Filipinos. Let me move to the next slide. The migration of Filipinos to Japan is influenced by historical and structural factors, and it's been largely feminized since the scarcity of rural brides in the 1970s, followed by the decline in entertainers in the red light districts until 1980s when Japan experienced high economic growth. The demand for productive and reproductive labor was significantly filled in by thousands and thousands of Filipino women who arrived at the land of the rising sun. Fast forward to the present time, as you can see here in the table, they're now occupying a spectrum of socioeconomic and residency statuses. I've already encircled in red pen on the rightmost column, the visa categories and corresponding socioeconomic positions of Filipino women. There is still a continuity in the feminized migration trends as more and more Filipino women come to work as wives, mothers. They come in as wives, mothers, entertainers, nurses, nannies, caregivers, maids, cooks, and in other service occupations deemed as feminine. The steady migration and settlement trends have significantly impacted the health and social security systems of Japan as a host country. So this presentation builds, as I've said, on a larger scoping research project on the health and social security systems literacy of Filipino migrant women in Japan. I'm not going to define these concepts as they have been explained by my colleagues. Thank you very much. But I look here into the first available research about the theme, the state of Filipino migrants' health and social security relative to their male counterparts and even other migrant populations, and the gendered nature of the issues surrounding their health and social welfare. So through the lens of gender, I'm able to highlight in this presentation the nature of health and social security inequalities pervasive in the Japan context, the differing degree of vulnerability that migrant women experience in comparison to migrant men and even to other women. Also, receiving more female migrants may significantly affect the prevailing systems providing healthcare and protection in the context of Japan as a destination country. And the host society itself, no, the Japanese society itself, can be a source of stressors affecting migrants, female migrants' health and well-being overall. So the study builds on a scoping review of existing studies about health and social security systems in relation to Filipino migrants, migrant residents, no, in Japan. And all these words, no, keywords, Filipino migrant, Japan, Philippines, social security, social protection, health policy, health system, healthcare, and literacy were used in the scavenging for all the relevant studies in the databases identified there. No, so out of the 18,065 studies retrieved, only 25 articles were deemed directly relevant to the topic of health and social security systems in Japan. And out of this number, 12 qualitative studies examined the experiences directly of Filipino migrants. So I'm not going to tackle one by one, but just for you to have an idea what are the titles, no, of these researchers that I was able to identify that are directly connected to the experiences of Filipino women in Japan. So these are the ones. Studies that tackle issues on health shows that compared to other migrants, Filipino migrant women may encounter more problems pertaining to perinatal and maternity care. They may be more prone to physical, emotional, and mental stress compared to other migrants or even Filipino male counterparts. So these studies expose how the systems can discriminate Filipinos not only for being migrant, but ultimately for being women, in a sense that the systems are both not cultural and gender sensitive at the moment. Japan has been notorious for implementing very highly assimilative policies, which explains the issue of cultural and linguistic barriers. These limitations are overcome when Filipino migrants turn to non-state actors such as multicultural communities, migrant and church-based networks who communicate better with them the health information and services that they need. So in terms of social security, existing studies have shown how when performing roles apart from being a worker, women may face greater socioeconomic hardship as a result of failed marriage, or divorce, compounding the burden to provide for one's own family and natal family back in the Philippines. The transnational and across the life course characteristics of poverty has driven more Filipino women to rely on social services and benefits and health benefits from Japan's social welfare system, even though they struggle to make regular payment contributions. Extant studies have shown that migrant networks play a critical role in overcoming barriers to accessing the social security systems of Japan. So to conclude, I wish to highlight preliminary points of the current stage of the project. So the scoping study has found that much of what has been written so far about the health and social security systems in Japan examines the accessibility challenges that Filipino migrant women face rather than their literacy. A focus on accessibility tends to depict Filipino women as vulnerable passive recipients of services and information, passive dependence at that. Whereas a focus on literacy gives importance to how migrant women's agency matters in navigating the systems, might have the potential to transform the system into being more gender sensitive and responsive to the diverse yet specific needs of migrant population. Our study proposes the need to conceptualize more female migrant literacy as a competency, the competency that encompasses knowledgeability, familiarity, and understanding of the prevailing systems. The longer that female migrants stay and contribute to the sustainability of the health and social security systems in host country, the more there are potential agents for the systems to be reformed. So I end there, and I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That's again another 7-minute presentation. I'm wondering how are you all managing this? So I would say this is a very comprehensive paper. The themes that you have touched upon. My own study is talking about mainstreaming gender in the conversations of migration. So this is really interesting, especially the mentioning of two aspects which I find very, very relevant is mental health and also motherhood. So migrant mothers is something which I think, again, not so much discussion has happened. And I'm happy that you have highlighted that. And again, here being, chairing this session personally, my takeaway is the aspect of the question of female literacy. In India, we don't have that concept of migrant literacy. So I think this is something which we at the Indian side we could really look at. And thank you so much for highlighting all of this. It's such a learning experience to all of us listening to all your papers. Thank you. And let me introduce our next speakers. We have Pooja Sharma and Surbhi Singh presenting their paper on imperatives of civil society and welfare state on migration during COVID-19 pandemic in Norway. Thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to present the paper here. So the paper, the title which we are presenting, now, it's Imperatives of Civil Society and Welfare State on Migration During Pandemic in Norway. So it's co-authored with Surbhi Singh. I am Pooja Sharma, Dr. Pooja Sharma, Associate Professor from University of Delhi, Daltram College. And Surbhi Singh, who's the co-author, is from School of International Studies, PhD scholar, Jawaharlal Nehru University. So this is the work, which is the ongoing work, and we are presenting the case of Norway. Now, to introduce the topic, Norway is one of the richest country in the world and is considered one of the significant country from the point of view of destination for migrants as well. So Norway is energy-rich country, which has adopted a welfare model state, and that is one of the most phenomenal models in terms of human well-being and dignity. So moreover, in addition to all this, it is the civil society initiatives have played in Norway a significant role in strengthening the foundation of the welfare state. Now, Norway has exhibited a very consistent influx of migrants over the past years, and based on this fundamentals of welfare state, Norway has immensely been generous and welcoming to the migrants across all the countries in the world. In addition to this, the role of civil society is realized not only in empowering welfare state, but also addressing some of the pertinent issues and serious challenges faced by the migrants during COVID-19 pandemic. So the paper basically revolves around the COVID-19 pandemic case, where the paper analyzes the interlinkages between the civil society, welfare state, and migration with threefold objective. Firstly, the study highlights the role of civil society in strengthening the welfare state itself through various grassroots level initiatives. And secondly, the paper evaluates the significance of Norway being the welfare state in providing the congenial environment for migration. Finally, the role of civil society is being evaluated and studied with respect to the immigration and COVID-19 pandemic. So the paper presents a significant role of civil society in resolving the challenges of the health disasters such as COVID-19 and proposing the institutionalization of the stakeholders such as state, migrants, and civil society. There has to be a lot of work, ground level work has to be done, which is presented in the paper. Now, I just quickly present the Norwegian model. Norway is a classic case of being oil-based company, but it has managed to divert the oil curse by the formation of the government pension fund global, which is called as Oil Fund, which was established in 1990, and it takes care of all the revenues from the Norwegian petroleum sector, around 1.19 trillion in assets, and holds 1.4% of the whole world listed companies. And the relationship of the civil society and welfare state was first systematically discussed strongly in 1970s, that it has become a third sector kind of a civil society between the state, market, and there is a third sector, civil society. As a result, the civil society organization 1980s new public management was created as a outsourcing of various types of welfare activities and services. And it competed with established non-profit welfare providers also for various public assignments. Role of government as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned is also seen as 100 billion Norwegian krona has been sanctioned as loans
to various businesses. At the same time, government announced 682 ventilators, and industry defense collaboration ensured that the production of 600 to 1200 emergency ventilators to meet the estimated needs. And government also ensured that the funding of 1000 of these should, and as well as the health experts was also there, but at the same time criticized as leading to a lot of gap for the health facilities. So I now request my co-presenter, Surbhi Singh, to take over the rest of the paper.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sharma. I think I'm audible. Yeah.
You are.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. So, well, definitely Dr. Sharma has already explained what is Norwegian model and how civil society and all. So question is here, like, I mean, why we are choosing Norway? Why, being a South Asian, why it is so interesting to use Norway as our case study? So definitely from being a South Asian perspective, we see that civil society organization has always been contestation with the state, whether they are fighting for poverty, unemployment, women emancipation, whatnot. But when we considered my study itself is on role of civil society in Nordic, study of Norway and Sweden. So my work is on that only, and I'm recently working on that. So we see a very interesting case where state and civil society are partnering, very well partnering with each other. And as we all know that Norway has a nanny state, has a welfare state, and everything they provide to their citizens, even immigrants, like food, shelter, education, health, everything. So why civil society we need it? Why we need a civil society? That was an interesting case for us. So when we went through all the literature, and Dr. Sharma has been to Norway, so she has seen also how the civil society and state partner there. So we have findings that welfare state and civil society compensate each other weaknesses. Like civil society lacks in the fund, so state provides that fund, and whereas the civil society organization have a main source of reaching to the citizen as well as to the immigrants, so they provide the information for the state to make a welfare policies. So that was the main reason why we chose Norway for the study, for the paper. Now I would like to give a little bit of evolution of civil society in Norway welfare model, because it's very interesting to know also, and it's important also how civil society grew. So basically in earlier days, there were association. People organized themselves in the year 1840, and later on in the form of parish society, church, private clubs, and later on, then in 1970 there was an increased global recession, economic recession, and in 80s there was fall in oil prices. Then the official Norwegian report has published that I'm reading out these lines, that it is important to stimulate and mobilize the forces that exist in local community. For example, agreements with voluntary organization that can be undertaken to perform specific tasks defined in cooperation between the affected parties in local community and in the municipality. That shows there was an economic necessity for rejuvenating these civil society organizations. So what different roles these civil society organizations, there were basically 4 roles they were used to play. First was the institutional welfare protection. Second was development of voluntary work as a supplement to public welfare services. Role of advocacy, which is one of the most important thing which civil society organization plays there. And the last is about innovation. You produce welfare services, but how to give it to the citizen, how to give it to the immigrants is the most important question which can be dealt with anywhere in any society. Now, the main part of our presentation is immigrants, because the conference is about migration. So important point of the paper was the immigrants. So Norway constitutes around 14.8% of total population of immigrants, and they are basically from Somalia, Syria, Pakistan, and Sweden. That's an interesting case for us to see that even the neighboring countries, the Schengen area countries, are also migrating to Norway. That's an interesting case to see. So that was about the migrants. Now, our main crux of the paper was that what was the experience of immigrants during COVID-19? What was the role of civil society, role of the state, and how far they have been successful? Because that is also the point which reaches to any researcher, that whether they were successful or not, for us to know also. So basically, our methodology for the paper was we couldn't do any basically survey, but we have taken some literature which was based on semi-structured interviews and focus group discussion. And it was around 31 immigrants who lived in Stavanger and Sadnes and municipalities in Norway. And they have chosen 2 language centers. So it was easy for us to know that whether different diverse age groups and gender and ethnic backgrounds people can be also inculcated. So before I directly jump to the role of civil society and role of government, it's quite interesting and it's quite useful also to know what was the status of immigrants in Norway. Basically, Norway is famous for Liktat. Liktat means it's a Norwegian language. Its meaning is in English is similarity and sameness. So they provide a similar treatment to the immigrants also. But still we have a lot of differences, a lot of discriminations which being faced by immigrants. First of all, is their language problem, which they face is always the language problem. Then the mental health is the next important thing, which because of this situation in the Norway, they face it. Later on, I'll explain why the mental health has become an important thing in the COVID-19 for the immigrants. Then about the job and integration in the labor market. That is also another point which we have to see. So now I'm coming to the next point. That is what challenges and what. I hope the time is there.
Could you please conclude in maybe 50 seconds?
No, not in the 50 seconds. I'll try.
1 minute maybe?
Okay. A minute I will be. Because there's so much to tell you guys. It's so much to tell.
I know. No, we don't doubt that. Thank you.
Basically, I'll cut short it now. So the thing is that they face a lot of stagnation. Like, I mean, there was restriction on travel movement. So they could not meet the immigrants couldn't meet their people in the home country. And the language problem was also there, so they couldn't access the health services, the health welfare services. They tell them to fill the form for going to availing for any services, but they don't know where to fill the form and where to get it from that done. That was another problem they used to face it. But we see some positivity also here. I am just going on the verge of conclusion only. We see some positivity also here, the high trust positivity. The immigrants, the participants had explained that they are lucky, they are fortunate that they are in Norway because they never have to go hungry. They were not jobless. Despite there was some occupation like taxi drivers, they were facing some problems because if they get some person who is infected, they have to quarantine for 10 days and then government is not going to compensate them. So that was a problem, but still their situation was far better than in their homeland. Here, I wanted to explain our role of civil society, but in 2-3 words, I'll explain how the civil society was helping. There were groups also, groups of professional nurses. They were also making groups for humanitarian groups for providing necessary essential items to the immigrants. Then providing information and also helping in tackling corruption. Because that was also the main point. I was wanting to emphasize on it, but due to lack of time, we cannot. And in conclusion, I would say that though Norway is a high trust society, people have trust on Norwegian government, authorities, civil society, but after looking at these interviews of participants, we see there is a scope of further government to think that we need more implementation process to get to the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this very, very thought-provoking concepts and questions. This reminds me of how much civil society was very active during the COVID, even in managing domestic migration as well as international migration and providing them support and all those help that they have rendered to the marginalized, vulnerable communities. And thank you so much. Sorry for rushing, your presentation. Thank you so much. And next is my paper. So I guess, since I'm keeping your time, I have to be very quick. My study is, I'm directly going to the presentation. without a break. So my presentation, my paper is on the gendered approach to the migration experience of India's women Gulf migrants before, during, and after the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a work in progress, and this presentation is just an overview of the interviews that I'm conducting since mid of 2020, towards the end of 2020. I'm not going into the history of migration, Gulf migration from India, or the statistics which is readily available in the public platforms. But what I want to highlight is Indian women migrants who are going to Gulf are a heterogeneous group. Most of the time, we have a tendency to homogenize them as women migrants, but they are a very heterogeneous group in terms of their identity, in terms of their caste, religion, and the region which they are hailing to. And as well as most of them are from middle and lower income Indian households. They engage in all categories of work in Gulf, but at the same time, we could see that the majority of concentration is in low wage, low skilled occupations. At this point, we should also keep in mind that there is a gender-based segregation of labor market and the stratified pattern of labor demand in the Gulf state as it is there in the global labor market, I would say. When we look at the pattern of migration, we could see that married or unmarried women, they migrate independently for work to the Gulf countries as domestic workers, to work in the IT sector as accountants, to work in the tourism and hospitality sector, etc., etc. Some women follow their husbands to the Gulf, and we usually categorize them as homemaker migrants. But then again, what is interesting about these homemakers is at some point of time or in the due course of their migration lives, they will be joining the labor force in some cases. What is lacking in most of the conversation, which I really want to highlight in my conversation, is we neglecting or sidelining women migrants as economic contributors. Not just to the sending country, which is India in this case, or in their destination, but they are also neglected and sidelined in the narratives of development. So when we look at sustainable development goals, or even in the conversations related to GCM and any, for that matter, any discourses on migration and development, many times we don't really mention women, or we don't really focus their contribution. We don't consider them as a primary economic contributor, which is something which I really want to highlight. And this has something to do with the existing patriarchal social system, global social system for that matter. And that is where I think, what makes their situation in the Gulf countries much precarious. Especially since they are bound within the system of sponsorship, very restrictive contractual labor system of kafala, where you could see that they face multiple deprivations, discriminations on the basis of intersectionality of their gender, religion, and class, as I have mentioned earlier. They do endure labor standard violations, abusive work conditions, sexual violence, exploitations, marginalization, discrimination. I can go on and on and on. And this was, again, I really wanted to kind of highlight this whole experiences of migration of women migrants from India to Gulf as before pandemic, during pandemic, and after pandemic, just to sort of assert that the situation is same, whichever phase we are talking about, the situation that they are facing, the vulnerabilities that they are facing, the marginalization, it's always there, and it's still continuing, is something which I would like to stress. And what is the implication of this? That's another question. The implication is that this really disempower women. And we mostly say that women who work are empowered. And many times, when we read scholarship on women migration and women migrants and the remittances that they send, there is this very passive references that such women are empowered. But the question is, are they really empowered in terms of in the real sense of that term? Especially when we look at their very particular experiences of migration, which in the during the pandemic has actually got worsened across all strata of labor. So we are talking about very skilled migrant women, semi-skilled women, migrant women, as well as low-skilled migrants. And we could see that the experiences, there is a lot of commonality in that sense. And we could also say that there is transnational commonality of migrant women experiences. And I really don't want to, again, go on and on about what they have suffered. But just to kind of, highlight or project the times that they have gone through in the past 2 years of COVID. The word standard, which we have used so much in terms of COVID-19 pandemic, we could see that one migrant women community who really have experienced that real meaning of standard would be domestic workers. Who is working in the private spaces of their employers, and especially in the Gulf context, it's the sponsors, it's the kafil. So the standard has a very, very strong sense and strong meaning to them and their experiences. When I was interviewing these women, they were saying that when I asked them about this particular word, even though they didn't understand what I was really looking for from their experiences, but they were saying that yes, we were literally stranded. But similar experiences you could see in the case of skilled migrants as well, but that wasn't of strandedness, but that was of sometimes working from home, when that small flat in the Gulf countries where your children are there, husband, partner would be working from the same flat, no designated workspace. At the same time, there is a lot of insecurity of job loss. And also something, and this has to be read together or understood together with the nationalization policies that Gulf countries are very vigorously, practicing. So the insecurity. So when I interviewed, skilled and semi-skilled women migrant workers in the Gulf, they were constantly talking about their worry about families' health and safety back home in India, their frustration of managing everything at home, not just their work, but also taking care of family, sanitation, health of the members. Also the guilt that they are not with their elderly parents back in India, their insecurity, their uncertainty. These interviews were really difficult. However, and also many didn't really get their salaries, got paid on time. Some of them had to return back to India. And that's when we, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, we are talking about wage theft. So many of them have experienced that, have gone through that difficulty as well. And when they have returned back to India, what was waiting for them was a system with no reintegration, rehabilitation policies. So we are talking about at the same time the vulnerable conditions, the precarity of their very existence as migrant laborers, but also at the same time we are talking about the insensitivity of our governance systems, national, global, local, be it be anything. Post-pandemic situation hasn't anything different from what it was before pandemic or during the pandemic. So I think what we need is, and this is also kind of my concluding remark to this whole session on health and migration and COVID-19 pandemic. I think what we should really need is the whole of society approach. We should have more political will. We should have more commitment. We should have more civil society commitment. We should have also have very practical schemes and policies in place. For instance, we should be providing financial literacy to these women, migrants, wherever they are, including Gulf, or when they are back, return after, due to COVID-19 pandemic or any other reason. I think we should upskill them so that if they want to rejoin in the labor force in the country, or if they want to remigrate, I think we should make them ready for that, the next step of their employment status. Because otherwise what will happen is, women's participation in the labor market is often associated with better access to economic opportunities, as well as greater decision-making power within the household. So we are talking about agency of women. If we are talking about real empowerment of women, I think we should have proper policies and schemes in place to upskill them, to reintegrate better in the whole society when they return from, their destinations. All of this is needed. And for that, I would say what is the need of the hour is kind of like, a perception, I would say general public perception that women are basic primary economic contributors. We should acknowledge that there is gendered nature, migration is gendered. We should acknowledge that governance systems are gendered. Pandemic is not gendered, but then pandemic related policies are gendered. So we have to mainstream gender related conversations whenever there is discussions and deliberations on migration and migration policies. With that note, let me sign off. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to chair the session as well. It's a great learning experience for me. Thank you very much. Professor Sahu, over to you. Oh, I think Professor Sahu isn't here. So may I invite Dr. Monica Bish to chair the next session? Over to you, Monica. Thank you so much. You are on mute. Could you please unmute yourself? Okay, let me see. Yeah, please try one second.
Good evening, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good evening. This session is basically based on forced migration and human rights. And am I audible? Hello? 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 Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Monica, you can continue.
Okay. So my name is Monica Bish. I'm chairing this session. This is day one of this conference, and we are in the parallel session number 3. And the theme of this session is forced migration and human rights. We have Mr. Andrew Mendy as rapporteur of the session, and Firoz Khan is dealing with the Zoom in charge. So basically, human rights is a very important, is one of the important forms of and types of human mobility. It has a long history in the human mobility, and forced migration affects the basic human rights, and therefore both forced migration and human rights have direct or indirect relationship with each other. So this session deals with the forced migration issues under the purview of COVID-19 and primarily during and after effects of pandemic. So we have 8 presenters. So I will call the name of the presenters. Please make the presence of yours in this session. First is Fiore Braun Aragon. Next is Sabah Fatima. Third is Hilal Barin. Fourth is Stefania Speda. Fifth is Manjima A. and Tanay Thakur. Sixth is Nazli Tore. Seventh is Subir Rana. And last one is Monica Veria. So without wasting much time, I would call Fiore Braun Aragon to present your paper on forced migration, integration, and solidarity.
Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please proceed.
I brought up short presentation, but I don't think I will share it except for the map, maybe the first part of it. Let me see if I can share. Sorry, let's see. There you go. So basically, I'm going to talk about forced migration, integration, and solidarity practices, and mostly the experience of Nicaraguan migrants in Costa Rica during COVID. So as you can see, I just put a map here in case some of you don't know where Nicaragua is and Costa Rica is. It's in Central America, basically here in this part. So mostly my introduction is what I'm going to talk about is I want to talk about the experiences of autoconvocados, which are basically youth migrants that were part of a social movement in Nicaragua in 2018 or that were mostly expelled or migrated forcefully to Costa Rica as a result of the government repression in Nicaragua. Most of them, interestingly, were university students and previously community organizers. So they had some experience working with vulnerable populations. As a result, when they migrated to Costa Rica, they started their own self-organized initiatives to support other immigrants. Some of the key facts that you should know about the context is that in 2017, the elections in Costa Rica were a big part of the debate was around immigration and human rights and around Costa Rica, around Nicaraguan immigration in particular, and the relevance of that, like if they should be integrated or not. That led to some xenophobic protests in 2018 that highlighted and happened a lot more during the COVID pandemic. My objective, particularly in this presentation and with my research, was to understand how xenophobic discourse influenced the integration of forced migrants. And I also wanted to analyze the solidarity practice carried out by migrant-led initiatives, specifically during COVID, and how they could inform and reshape integration policies to counteract the xenophobia, mostly in the context of the humanitarian crisis during COVID pandemic. My methodology was mostly discourse analysis. I reviewed newspapers, online newspapers from like the Costa Rican most popular media during the fall of 2020 and spring of 2021. I also did a literature review on Costa Rican nationhood, Nicaraguan migration, Costa Rican immigration law, and integration policies. And I conducted 9 semi-structured interviews, mostly with 3 immigrant leaders leading some self-organized integration initiatives. One is called the Agricultural Camp of the Campesino Movement that's located in Alajuela at the border between Nicaragua and Costa Rica. I also conducted interviews with a movement called Volcánicas, which is a women's collective, and the Nicaraguan LGBTQ Roundtable in Costa Rica. I also interviewed academics, a government official, some local advocates, and lawyers working in Nicaraguan migration and integration. My theoretical framework for this was mostly like all the theoretical discussions around integration and multicultural integration policies. Unfortunately, most of the literature in this case is focused on South-North migration. Therefore, there's not a lot written about South-South migration. And of course, there's not a lot of literature in Central America specifically. So that was a little bit of a challenge. And in this framework, I was mostly trying to focus on understanding the concept of rights of the host community because of the relevance, because it's the foundation of the possibilities of integration. I also studied solidarity practice by Martín Baró, who is a Central American social psychologist that argues that solidarity can counteract and challenge exclusionary practices and kind of dismantle the construction of the enemy, especially in post-war contexts in Central America. My key findings around this is that, unfortunately, as of now, there is a lot of exclusionary public discourse on migration and integration, particularly against Nicaraguan immigrants. These come mostly from far-right parties, so I wouldn't say it's the most common practice among the population, but also it comes from popular sectors affected by the reduction of the welfare system in Costa Rica. This particularly happened after the 90s, but I would say that as of now, because of the political and economic crisis, because of COVID, that definitely fueled some of our xenophobic sentiments against Nicaraguan mostly, but also towards other immigrants. One of the key challenges around integration is that despite the fact that Costa Rica has a very comprehensive integration policy and a human rights-centered immigration law, there's a lack of financial and human resources to implement that integration policy. I also found out that there was a lot, like generally lack of knowledge from immigration officials working at the border or in institutions around the San Jose, for example, that didn't know about the rights of immigrants or even the immigration, basic concepts around the immigration policy of your own country. This kind of showed that there's a top-down approach to integration policies. And mostly when I talk to community organizers and immigrants, they felt like their contributions were left out of the conversations on integration by the government. Interestingly, most of the integration programs are focused on the metropolitan area. So it basically left out all immigrants in rural areas, which are most of them, because a lot of them work as agricultural workers. So they are in the northern border or in some other rural areas where agriculture is the main economic activity. Despite that, the 3 self-organized initiatives I work with are doing, I would say, 2 very important contributions to the debate on integration, and hopefully they will be listened by the government in the future. One of them is they're creating a human rights-centered discourse on immigration by highlighting the contributions of immigrants to the country. They try to attend community activities or even have been in media showing the contributions of immigrants to the economics and to the society in general. Something interesting in this case is that because of the cross-border immigration and the long history between Nicaragua and Costa Rica, there are a lot of mixed binational families. So they were also trying to highlight that as part of like the necessity of an integration process for them. The second is that they're creating spaces for dialogue and contributing to local economies. Something that I found out particularly with the agricultural camp is that in times of need, they were really supporting the local community by providing food for free that they were producing in their own camp. So that was something that was like created the space for a dialogue with locals that highlighted some opportunities for integration that are not being considered by the government, but are still happening in the borderlands, in the border area. My conclusion, I would say, is that this definitely highlights the need for a bottom-up approach to integration and the inclusion of migrant voices, and also highlighting the contributions of migrants to the host communities and to the country. Something important that all the interviewees highlight is that it is relevant to bring the voices and contributions of immigrants to the discussion table, especially because they have a lot of experience as community organizers and working. They know the needs of their communities, and nonetheless, they're not being included in those dialogues. And also something that we found out finally is that highlighting those contributions and sharing immigrant stories was a great way to counteract xenophobic discourse because it highlighted the common humanity of people like from both countries. And it definitely widened the conceptions of citizenship and rights in Costa Rican law and society. So hopefully by including those voices, Costa Rican integration policy that as of now is really comprehensive and is very innovative in Central America can even be better in the future for Nicaraguan immigrants, but also from some other immigrants from Haiti and Venezuela and Colombia that are also arriving in that country. So I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a nice presentation. Congratulations, Fiore. So this paper basically deals with the exclusionary policies and how the people are not aware about the government programs and schemes, national projects about the, their migration, easy migration process and all. So it was a nice presentation. Thank you. So now we will move to the next presentation. And next is Syrian refugee women and COVID-19, Life is a Crisis Within a Crisis by Sabah Fatima. Are you there? Sabah, are you there? Okay,
She is
she is
there, but she is
joining.
not get connected.
Okay.
Actually,
So, okay.
we can
So,
go to the next.
we can move to the next presentation and Sabha will join us later on. So the next is the problems of Syrian migrant entrepreneurs during the COVID-19 pandemic, the case of Ankara by Hilal Baran. So Baran, are you there?
No.
No? Okay. So next is Italy as an experimental laboratory for the violation of migrants' fundamental rights. Stefania Speta. No?
No.
Presenters are not available here.
Manjima, we can go.
Okay, next is racial profiling of immigrants. Do some bodies matter more by Manjima A and Tanay Thakur.
Hello, Monica. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
I would need like 3 minutes to set up because I thought I was like after 3, so I need to set up on another laptop too. Yeah, just 5 minutes, just a few minutes. Yeah. Maybe you can try if anyone, the other participant is there by the time I set up. Maybe.
Okay. So next presenter is Nazli Tore. Nazli, are you prepared for the presentation now? Missing migrant children in Europe.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Would you like to present now?
Okay.
Okay, please present.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Nazlı Tore. I'm an associate professor in the field of private international law, now representing Turkish Council of Women, which is a civil society organization based in Ankara. As you all know, the COVID-19 pandemic and ensuing Russia's invasion over Ukraine have worsened generally the situation of migrants in Europe. Unfortunately, children are the most vulnerable group among them, and they are therefore particularly in need of protection against all forms of exploitation. When Europol stated in 2016 that approximately 10,000 registered child migrants were missing in Europe, calls for their protection were high on the political agenda. Nevertheless, action to protect migrant children remains insufficient. It is estimated that a child goes missing in Europe nearly every 2 minutes, and that one registered migrant child is reported missing or dead every day globally. The latest data clearly shows the magnitude of the problem. According to Lost in Europe, 18,292 children in migration went missing in the region between the years 2018 and 2020. In addition, the war on Ukraine has led to more than 6 million Ukrainians, mainly women and children, seeking refuge abroad, putting them at risk of separation and going missing. Many human rights organizations have already warned for the risk of human trafficking with regard to these most vulnerable groups after the Russia's invasion. Lost in Europe found out that 1.5 million children fleeing from Ukraine within the first month of the war were not monitored properly. Only 4 countries registered how many unaccompanied children entered their country. 8 others provided inadequate data or did not register or provide data at all. The number of missing Ukrainian children is not exactly known right now. European countries rather prefer to sign several refugee deals in hopes of inhibiting the arrival of asylum seekers to Europe, such as the EU-Turkey deal in 2016 and the deal between Italy and Libya in 2017. It has been suggested that these agreements would help decrease the number of missing or dead migrants. The data simply shows the opposite. Since January 2018, during 3 years, at least 440 children have died trying to reach Europe, among them 35 babies, as well as 33 pregnant women. Most of these children were coming from Morocco, Libya, and Turkey. According to Kyiv Independent, 16 children have been killed during the first week of Russia's invasion over Ukraine. This time, the European Union had to act faster in order to ensure newcomers have access to essential basic services, reception, health and social services. More coordinated and comprehensive measures were taken to prevent this time the physical and psychological harm both children and families are facing at the moment. Recently, migrant children issue has gained much more importance in Europe. However, Asylum and refugee issues have increasingly become more divisive after the migration crisis in 2015-2016, when 1.3 million migrants arrived in Europe, leading de facto collapse of European Union's commons asylum system. Today, all European states accept that they must act urgently to address the migrant children issue. To that end, they have to adopt integrated child protection systems with a special focus on the best interest of the child. However, European Union seems to have failed to protect migrant children on its territory so far. In this failure, the lack of solidarity among member states, as well as their unwillingness to share extra burden, certain incompatibilities and gaps in acquis communautaire, incomplete and or erroneous policy implementations, preference of migration control over the protection of migrant children, and finally, costs in social services throughout Europe have been considerably influential. Here, the responsibility for the protection of unaccompanied migrant children falls on all European countries as well as the European Union itself. For this reason, both non-members and member states of the European Union and its institutions must improve data collection, sharing, particularly when identifying and registering unaccompanied children, and should work together to achieve durable solutions once those children are in care. In the meantime, normative framework regarding the protection of migrant children in Europe requires to be more human and compassionate throughout the entire migration process. Most children perceive Austria, the Czech Republic, and Serbia as transit countries and try to move to other countries in Europe, but altercations between border guards and migrants have been reported during such movements. Such interactions between migrants and authorities could work against asylum and protection needs. Different agencies may also interpret the compulsory accommodation of migrants in reception facilities differently, which could result in coercion and violence. The responsibility for the protection of unaccompanied migrant children is a kind of responsibility that can be avoided by subsidizing some countries. The common future of the whole world, the children, is at stake here. Therefore, policy preferences on the treatment of migrant children within the continent have become a good test for the realization of great European ideal. Although European countries fundamentally agree upon improving the migration and asylum policies of the European Union, there are some differences in opinion on how to make this improvement. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has triggered Europe's biggest migration crisis in decades, with more than 2 million Ukrainians leaving their country within 2 weeks. Most of them are women and children. This time, Europeans have stepped up, welcoming these people with open arms, in stark contrast to their response to Syrian refugees a few years ago. European countries are also now being accused of double standard and hypocrisy in their struggle of the new crisis, with many critics pointing out racial bias in the way white migrants were being portrayed vis-a-vis migrants of color. In conclusion, the degree of protection they provide to migrant children in general will show us whether European countries are upholding their great European ideal or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazli. It was a quite interesting topic. We got to know about the forced migration under the missing migrant children in Europe, and how the issue revolves around the exploitation, marginalization, and children vulnerability. So I would like to congratulate Nazli Tore for the paper. Now would you like Manjima A and Tanay Thakur, are you ready? Okay. Firoz, can you switch on the, unmute them? Firoz, can you please unmute?
Done.
Okay.
Yes, sure. So before we begin our presentation, we have a PPT to share.
Okay.
So I'm doing that
Please
now.
share.
Is it visible?
Yes.
start the slideshow.
Yeah. So
Is it in the slideshow mode? Not yet, right?
Not yet.
Wait.
Yeah.
I guess now. Yeah.
Yes.
So hello everyone. So we have written a paper on the topic racial profiling of immigrants. Do some bodies matter more? So we would like to look at the aspect of racial profiling of immigrants by giving it a theoretical scaffolding of the theories that underpin the nation state, how the naturalization of the racialized nation as the primary source of belonging has culminated in creating the perception of migration as an existential threat, which under the discourses of globalization and the demand for labor induced by capitalism has led to the distinction between a good migrant and a bad or undesirable immigrant. And these are the major topics that we will deal further upon. First, in building our theories, we would be referring to the necropolitics, biopower, and how it relates to social construction of migrants, followed by racialization of migration discourse, COVID-19, the migrant experience, and we shall conclude by examining the institutional inadequacies. So, first of all, the theoretical scaffolding. So we would like to look at the racial profiling of immigrants by basing our theories upon the necropolitics of Akhil Mbembe, biopower of Foucault, and how this impacts the social construction of migrants. So necropolitics is the politics of attributing differing values to life, which is an exceptional power associated with the sovereign, that is the capacity to define who matters and who does not, who is disposable and who is not. So this necropolitics has been identified as subjugation of life to the power of death, which is contrasted with the biopower of Foucault in his grand project of conceptualizing governmentality, which is identified as a power exerted in disciplining the body that most prominently manifests as a positive influence on life, which endeavors to administer, optimize, and multiply it. So what Mbembe did, he found biopower to be inadequate in explaining the various politics of life and death that has been happening, and which is why he came up with the concept of necropolitics. And race is something that underpins both biopower and its extension of necropolitics. For Foucault himself identified racism as a way of introducing a break into the domain of life that is under power's control, a break between what must live and what must die. And it is these concepts that manifest in the migration discourse. For instance, when there is a perception of migrants as the enemy at the gates who bring crime, militancy, disease, and cause corruption of pure cultures, there is the biopower and necropolitics manifesting in the social construction of immigrants. And this is this aspect that we will be exploring more through our paper.
So moving forward with the racialization, apart from separating two nation states, border patrol by guards draw a line between the citizens and others, us versus them. So I will be first dealing with the phenomena of othering. I hope I'm audible. Yeah, I'm audible, right? Okay, yeah. So when this other reached the slave of international border, the desirable other is secured as the filtrate, whereas the undesirable residue defines the privileges and limitations of the citizens. The half of the royal family of England actually crossed the border, yet they are not migrants. So we can clearly see that the mobilities are racialized, classed, and seen as problematic. Such mobilities further shape the discourse around migration. The fiction of race was created by Europeans as they encountered different cultures and civilizations. This created a racial categorization system of human species and divided the world along racial lines, which we today know as nation states. The scientific justification of racism was coupled beautifully with civilizing mission of European in their big larger project of colonialism, and hence synthesized the international system which was meant for the subjugation of blacks, indigenous people, and other people of color. And hence we see that how the homogeneous us is something that they contrasted with the other, and hence the border came into existence.
So how this racialization manifests in itself in the migration discourse? There are two aspects that make this visible. One is the hypervisibility of immigrants, and second is the invisibility of immigrants. To bring this picture into more of contemporary significance, I'd like to highlight two incidents that happened, which we undertook as a case study. First, after the 9/11 attacks, when US embarked on a global war on terror, internal security measures and were heightened and mass surveillance was employed. But an issue that came less into the spotlight was the mass detention of immigrants under the suspicion of linkages with terrorist networks and the inhuman treatment that followed. The detainees were mostly young Middle Eastern men and Middle Eastern and Muslim men who were problematically singled out, not under any suspicion of wrongdoing, allegations of connection with terrorism, but on the basis of ethnicity, religion, or nationality. And this is an example of hypervisibility of immigrants, particularly in the criminalization of immigrants, and bringing another story to the forefront. We all know that there are only a couple of days left for the FIFA World Cup to start, and it would be Qatar that would be hosting the FIFA World Cup. So when Qatar won the bid to host FIFA World Cup, the country embarked on an infrastructural whole, building huge stadiums, luxurious hotels, transportation networks, etc. But what is less highlighted is the exploitation of the migrants that has been happening under the garb of the FIFA World Cup, which has been pushed under the carpet. So there was this very unveiling study done by the Amnesty International, which revealed more than 21,000 deaths that has happened in the past 2 years or so. And what you see here is the stark invisibility of migrant workers in the eyes of state authorities. And by contrasting these two case studies, we come across the contrast between hypervisibility and the invisibility of migrants. Migrants are rendered hypervisible mostly in the context of experiencing demeaning or punitive measures from the community or the state, and migrants are rendered invisible, resulting in isolation or increasing vulnerability to violence due to inaction on the part of the state or community. Moving on to COVID-19 and migrants.
So this is another case study that we undertook as a part of our paper. And so as we all picked up our sanitizers and started breathing under our mask, the government too masked their territories and closed their borders. As suspicion filled the air, social exclusion and xenophobia became the norm. During the pandemic, all the ordinary vices of human beings manifested overtly against the unfamiliarity and differences at different levels and modes. As COVID-19 started claiming lives, the virus became the invisible enemy and the outsiders became the visible enemy. And further on, like to understand that how this happened, we can see that how the colonial practices or the old colonial terms like yellow peril and other colonial practices manifested itself in the modern era when the US president very overtly referred COVID-19 as a Chinese virus, as a Wuhan virus, and it puts light to the US long history of othering and discrimination of Blacks, indigenous people, and other people of color. The racial others were seen as infection-prone, kind of having this exotic sickness and generally unhealthy. Further on, when we look at the institutional structures also, we see that how this systemic othering is ingrained in the institutionals as well. And hence we move towards the global health regime in which the major player is WHO. In WHO, we see the first article of WHO, which clearly states the objective says attainment by all people of the highest possible level of health. Hence, WHO promised a very just world by attempting to erase the racial lines drawn by the colonial powers, to ensure the health of all people and also lead to elementary peace and security. However, the 2005 WHO International Health Regulation, it is very apparent that it did nothing but gave more power to the state surveillance, and it gave them this temporary power to hold people under unregulated and also documented time of quarantine. So how it happens is that the regulation underlying the circumstances for putting suspected people under public health observation, quote unquote public health observation, implementing quarantine or other health measures for suspected individuals, refusing the entry of suspected and affected person, refusing the entry of unaffected people to the affected areas. And hence, we see that how effectively WHO is giving rights to the countries to place restriction on the mobilities. And the more interesting part comes with the power that they give the states to declare public health emergency of international concern. Further institutional inadequacies will be discussed by Manjima.
So moving on to the major institutions that define the global migration regime, we have handpicked a few. For instance, if we look at International Organization of Migration, the motto is managing migration for the benefit of all. However, we are, from what we have discussed so far, the very idea of nation state fractures any vision involving all. And this calls for the problematization of cross-border mobilities. Intergovernmental organizations like IOM, ICMPD, UNHCR, etc., are born out of the possibility of managing migration. When in the very terminology managing of migration, there is a politics involved, which seeks to provide again solutions to the problems of migration. And this constitution of migration as a problem, or it's a crisis that has to be managed in itself, was something if you look historically, came with the division of the world, bifurcation of the world into nation states, because even during the period of empires, the mobility was something that was never a problem that has to be managed in itself. Now, when we pick up the two revolutionary documents that promised human rights for all, the GCM and the GCR, we can see that even the bureaucratic challenges that both the documents are facing and their challenges that they face in bringing positive impacts on the ground. And currently the IMRF reviews are going on. But there are several to develop a proper perception survey of both the reports. There is a lack of empirical data on ground that builds the success of these documents based on the perception of migrants, on the positive impacts these documents had in granting them rights, and not just the perception that the states have on how they have taken initiatives in implementing GCR and GCM and what they think how migrants benefited out of them.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I humbly request you to please mind the time limit and kindly focus on the highlights of the paper.
Yes, we are concluding.
Yeah.
Okay, so just kind of giving the overview of this institutional inadequacy, just to add one point here. So basically what we see here, that most of the regulations that we were talking about, most of them are non-enforceable, and hence the occurrence of non-compliance with its recommendations cause a lot of problem. Hence, we saw that WHO also doesn't have any mechanism to impose sanction on the countries which are not really following the regulations led by WHO. And it's interesting to note that the International Health Regulations of 2005 actually turned a blind eye to the long history of the racial profiling of the migrants by not even mentioning the term race in their whole report. So now we can conclude it that how our report had the empirical research that we did in terms of case study. We picked up 2 case studies. That was the FIFA World Cup, which is to be held this year in Qatar, and the other one being the COVID-19 experience. And
based on our case studies and the theoretical work we done, these are our recommendations that we came across, how institutions can include and can acknowledge the effect of race and harmonize their effort, be less bureaucratic, and ensure that there is a positive impact on ground through sanctioning mechanisms. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjima and Tanay. I like the idea of your paper, racialization of migration discourse. I think first time I'm listening about how the visibility and invisibility of the migrants perceived by the natives or the world. So this is very great idea. I mean, you have discussed the this concept with the theoretical approach that was beautifully done, and the case studies both in case of hypervisibility and invisibility is very impressive. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. So next presentation is by Subir Rana, if he is available here. Subir Rana is available?
No.
No?
No. Now Sabah has rejoined and Monica Veera is there.
Okay. So Sabah, can you please wait, and I will come to you after the paper on Biden dismantling Trump's migration policy by Monica Veera, so that this section will be completed, and then I will start from the beginning. Is it fine? So the next presentation,
no problem.
Okay, thank you. So the next presentation is on Biden dismantling Trump's migration policy by Monica Veera.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello. Thank you so much. I am very pleased to be here in this international seminar, which has been very interesting. Well, I'm going to share some PowerPoint. Well, in the middle of a terrible pandemic, President Biden took office on January 2021. Since the beginning of his administration, he has had a more positive attitude towards migration, changing the narrative with a more humane approach. He has been trying to reverse the damage caused by Trump's anti-immigrant policies through the signing of several executive orders to reverse them as difficult tasks that require substantial structural changes. During his 20 months as president, he has signed several executive actions in order to limit the construction of the border wall, increase the refugee cap to 125,000 for 22 and 23, from only 15,000 that established by Trump the last year, and ended the Muslim ban. And then the zero tolerance policy, launching efforts to accelerate the reunification of migrant families, lifted the suspension of green card processing, expanded the number of beds in different shelters, decreased internal deportation, shortened the paperwork review process for asylum seekers with a hearing, stopped the expulsions of unaccompanied children under Title 42, fighting to end it so far without any luck, managed to eliminate the Migrant Protections Protocol program or remain in Mexico despite the obstacles he faced in the Supreme Court, defended the deferred action of childhood arrivals, better known as DACA, initiative for almost 600 dreamers who are in limbo, expanded the temporary protected status protection, and he has focused on the existing root causes that push migrants out of the countries of origin and propose investment in the Central American region, reinstate minors program, adjudicating some asylum claims to trained asylum officers. We cannot deny that Biden has taken constructive steps, but they have been slow in some respects and in others not very visible. Democrats assume that Biden had the ability to easily reverse or de-Trumpize the changes established in the immigration system, but this has not been the case since it has been logistically and politically difficult because of the Trumpist bureaucracy, has been very difficult to reverse, and the Republicans still use extremely toxic xenophobic rhetoric in the immigration debate, constructing a highly charged political issue. It is true that Biden mishandled immigration messaging by transmitting for more humane approach interpreted by some as more relaxed border policies. At the same time, large migration movements have been increasing during the last years in the whole world, especially from Latin and Central America, but also countries as far as India, passing through Mexican territory to the United States. It has been registered a notable increase in the arrest and deportations of single adults and entire families at the US-Mexican border who are quickly removed under Title 42 order. This mechanism evoked during the pandemic, which implies not receiving asylum applications at the border, since they are expelled before doing so. They are not processed and are immediately returned to Mexico, which is why so many cross the border several times. Biden had promised to eliminate it. However, a judge banned it, which gave Biden a breath or pause, given the unmerciful and growing criticism in the migration debate from Republicans that the border is out of control. So it is important to mention that the number of apprehensions at the border have increased significantly. It has been registered 2.4 million apprehensions during the fiscal year 2022, which ended in September, which is greater than the 1.6 million apprehensions or events in fiscal year 2021, doubled of those of 2019 of 859. Nevertheless, deportations from the interior of the country diminished. During 2021, only 72,000 deportations, less than the 100,000 during 2020. Despite its contradictory messaging, the Biden administration has taken steps to funnel migrants legally into seasonal non-agricultural jobs in sectors where they are desperately needed. Last June, he made available additional 35,000 temporary visas, and in October, he announced that he will double the number of temporary work visas for jobs involving hospitality, landscaping, and seafood processing, allowing 64,000 non-agricultural low-skilled jobs, in addition to the 66,000 currently available each fiscal year. It's important to mention that Mexican admissions almost in all types of temporary visas were harshly affected by the Trump administration and the pandemic. The decrease from 297,000 in 2019 to 265,000 in 2020, to 346,000 visas during 2021, an unprecedented number who established a watershed. Excellent news for Mexicans. In comparison purposes, Central Americans from Northern Triangle, that is to say Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, received a total of 5,000 temporary visas in 2020, but doubled them to 10,000 in 2021, who also represent excellent news, but still insufficient. One of the main problems is asylum. What Biden has tried to do is speed up the process through immigration judges and assign several asylum officers, which was nearly impossible during the Trump era. That's partly because an important increase in insecurity, climate disasters, and COVID created unemployment and misery, thus mass migration across the globe. Immigration courts had not been able to keep up with the surge of newcomers. Over the past 2 years, about 1 million people have been allowed into the country to await hearings in immigration courts. But if you include deportation orders, the backlog in immigration courts climbs to 1.9 million. And of those, 750,000 are asylum cases. The problem still remains at the border, which is the imposition of Title 42 by not allowing asylum seekers to apply, but also in the internal procedures. The goal is to make the system faster. And what have been the main reasons of the exponential increase in Mexican migratory flows? The combination of increasing violence through Mexico, a terrible mismanaged pandemic by our President López Obrador, the 8.5% drop in the economy in 2020, added to the 0% non-growth during 2019, the first year of López government, which was minus 1% in 2021, and an economy without growth and with inflation and the drastic drop of investment. All of these factors have led to an increase in employment, poverty, and inequality since AMLO took power, and have therefore led to expulsion of greater number of Mexicans to the US. The remittances that have increased significantly to $56,000 million during the last months represented 4% of the GDP, which had alleviated some families. Unfortunately, for every $100 of remittances, $7 go to smugglers or coyotes. Mexicans had high expectations when Biden was elected president after having been constantly threatened and continuously insulted by Trump. It is clear that U.S. immigration system has long been overburdened and outdated, and the asylum process is a big part of what is not working. The comprehensive immigration reform sent to Congress at the beginning of this government is now stuck in Congress. Unfortunately, it has remained a dream, difficult to become a reality for Mexicans here and there, especially for the 5.5 million undocumented Mexicans out of 11 million undocumented migrants in the United States. The border situation has highly preoccupied the Biden administration in view of the midterm elections next November 8, feeding Republicans' arguments that the border is unsecured, out of control. Immigration is always an issue regularly used in their national debate to pulverize Democrats at election times. Republicans and Democrats differ their points of view over migration policy. Republicans place mainly particular importance on border security and deportations of immigrants who are in the country illegally, while Democrats place greater importance on path to legal status for those who enter the country illegally, especially those who enter as children like dreamers. In electoral times, there is poor appetite to pass an immigration reform. Legalizing 11 undocumented migrants seems like an impossible task to achieve in the short term. A piecemeal approach is a more feasible one than a comprehensive immigration reform. In the short or medium term, I think that both Republicans and Democrats could agree in a bipartisan to resolve the situation of dreamers, as well as those with temporary protected status, explore proposals to allow states to sponsor aliens when their labor markets need them, increase temporary worker visas, among other initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica Veria. It was a quite interesting topic on the regime change and how the policies shifted from one president to another, and especially in the case of COVID-19. So you have discussed several things, the Biden's strategy, approaches, actions, and your own reflections, why those things had happened during the COVID time. So the important part of your paper was the major actions taken by the Biden, like increasing visas for temporary workers during COVID-19, asylum workers, and how he tried to legalize the undocumented immigrants. So it was a nice paper. Thank you very much, ma'am. So now I would like to move to the next presentation by Sabah Fatima. The topic of the presentation is Syrian refugee women and COVID-19, life is a crisis within a crisis. So Sabah, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, you have 7 to 10 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. It's Sabah Fatma, PhD scholar from Center for West Asian Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia. My paper topic is Syrian refugee women and COVID-19, life is a crisis within a crisis. Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Syria is a West Asian country bordering Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, and Israel. The most complicated humanitarian crisis in history is being produced due to the Syrian war, which has resulted in a significant amount of death and devastation. 11 years ago, a peaceful uprising in Syria descended into a bloody civil war since the Assad's family rule was initially opposed by protesters in 2011. More than 5 lakh Syrians have perished, and at least 13 million others have been forced to flee their homes. So in new countries of refuge, Syrians' first and foremost concerns was to arrange finances for their survival. Most of the Syrian refugee women were in need of finance to fulfill their basic needs, such as food, clothing, shelter. Syrian refugee women facing sexual exploitation and gender-based violence due to inability of paying rent and finding work in most of the host countries. There are also cases in which Syrian refugee women are compelled to do petty jobs and are sometimes exploited in prostitution and survival sex just to feed their children and families. The vast majority of Syrians lives in cities in Turkey. There are about 3.6 million refugees, and in Lebanon about 1 million, and Jordan about 650,000. These refugees are mostly living in poor and live on the outskirts of society, where there is losing their jobs, livelihood, shelter, and food. And now, moreover, this COVID-19 has exacerbated extreme poverty and violence against women. The coronavirus has weakened an already precarious source of income for these refugees. The informal labor market, according to Omar Kador, policy analyst at the Turkish Economic Policy Research Foundation, informal employment has already been linked to exploitation and low pay. Syrians were hit harder by the economic downturn than native Turks. According to research, the refugee population has suffered from higher rates of unpaid absence and unemployment. Refugees are more likely to be released than local Turks because they are deemed expendable, lack occupational training and educational qualifications, lack work permits, and lack labor rights. Refugees are also finding it difficult to obtain an education because of the pandemic. Around 47% of the refugee population in Turkey under the age of 18. According to research, a substantial percentage of Syrians are unable to use online program that was created in Turkey to substitute for missing schooling. Many refugee students lack access to technology and internet resources that they require to continue their studies. So the study finds that women who have experienced a crisis, being displaced, face a triple barrier of COVID-19, displacement, and gender-related problems. However, policies and enough finance have not yet been secured for Syrian refugee women economic empowerment. There are clear gender inequalities in women's capacity to earn and work in formal salaried jobs. Throughout the pandemic, people will need to work, access financial services, and take on unpaid tasks. However, this group faces a number of obstacles, including limit on their freedom of movement, access to healthcare, etc. So key findings of my paper are this. It is true that no nation was completely prepared for this pandemic, but in war-torn Syria and among its people in the other countries as refugees, its consequences on populace have severe, particularly on women. Thus, assurance may be lacking for Syrian women who have migrated to neighboring countries such as Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon to escape the civil strife in their nation. But due to the lockdown restriction during COVID-19, the strength of women has diminished. Since they could not go to work or go outside, the situation was not improved by loosening lockdown regulations, and it had eroded their confidence and independence. The majority of Syrian refugees lived in insecure and challenging situations in host countries, which made them susceptible to catching the virus and transmitting it. The situation was layered further with more complications and challenges. For example, in Lebanon, a country that hosts estimated about 1.5 million Syrian refugees, was currently facing a very severe economic crisis, civil unrest, and COVID-19 outbreak, while curfew was imposed in order to control the disease, and prices of food and medicines had sourced a country that relies heavily on imports to meet its needs. The latter, it became more difficult under restrictions imposed by the economic crisis, as well as the diseases, consequently allocating resources and such needed help to the refugees might be unavailable or scarce at best. While the UN Refugee Agency and other NGOs are attempting to provide support and awareness to the refugees, the reality is that significant funding is required, given the various needs and high number of to these refugees. In that regard, UNHCR has appealed for urgent funding to combat COVID-19 in refugee camps. Women were confronted with extra gender-related hurdles when they integrated in Turkish society, in addition to economic challenges brought on by their lack of access to the labor market. They experienced social isolation, gender discrimination. For instance, an example relating to gender violence is the donning of a scarf. The way Syrian women and Turkish women wear scarves is different, which makes them look distinguished. When we see the case of Jordan has included refugees in very facet of its public health response, and some refugees have already begun to get the vaccination. The government has prioritized defending the nation against the epidemic, but has not addressed the societal ramifications that these actions have brought about. The cases of domestic violence has drastically increased after the pandemic. The government had prioritized defending the nation against the pandemic, but has not addressed the societal ramifications that these actions have brought about. Syrian refugee women had already experienced a number of difficulties in their new countries, including poverty, unemployment, shelter, prostitution, sexual exploitation at the workplace, and forced marriage. However, studies and reports have shown that despite these challenges, Syrian refugees women were learning new skills with the aid of host governments, NGOs, and international organizations like UNHCR. They were started to adjust and be made to feel more comfortable. However, COVID-19 and the association lockdown limitations have largely undone this advancement. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees reported a decline in calls to the protection hotlines for gender-based violence in Lebanon and Jordan during the first few months of lockdown, but later on, cases of abuse increased due to domestic violence and inability to earn due to the lockdowns. During lockdown, cases of domestic violence were increased among Syrian refugee families due to the frustration of unemployment and lockdown. After the pandemic, there is an extreme need for government to encourage socializing, networking, and meeting in engaging safe areas for female Syrian refugees. These facilities would improve gender-based violence reporting and offer not psychological support services. It will help them be empowered again to come out and earn enough to live a suitable life. There is also need to encourage accountability for violence against women and assist the legal system investigation and prosecution of incidents of such abuse in the refugee community. During these unprecedented times, there is need for global and urgent support for these disenfranchised populations. The health of refugees intimately linked to that of their hosting communities and beyond, which is an additional reason to protect the camps from COVID-19. Okay, ma'am, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sabah. So, Sabah, your paper was focused on Syrian refugee women and COVID-19. The paper.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So the highlights of the paper is no country was prepared for the pandemic, and Syria was most affected or hit hard by pandemic because of the poverty and unemployment condition there. And she has focused on the women issue. So the lockdown and the cessation of the mobility has severely affected the women's condition in the country, and there are so many cases of social, psychological, and economic impact on Syrian refugee women. She has also discussed several impact or the problems of refugee programs for women in the Syria, and how the marginalization, vulnerability, and sex work was intense during crisis. So the women was mostly exploited and confronted majorly the hurdles of the pandemic. So thank you, Fatima, for the paper.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So the next paper is on Italy, or the problems of Syrian migrant entrepreneurs during the COVID-19 pandemic, the case of Ankara. Is Hilal Baron available here? No? Stefania Speda?
No.
No? So I think, and then last one is Subir Rana? No? So
Let me check.
I will mark them absent for this session. and I will conclude this session now, so that next session. Okay. So thank you everyone. Thank you every presenter over here. I like to thank you for the diverse topics and the issues and the reflections on the forced migration and human rights during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to thank the rapporteurs and the Feroz Khan for helping me in the Zoom meeting. So now, once again, first time I would like to apologize for incorrectly naming the name of the presenters. So thank you very much for this session. So I hand it over to Feroz to stop this session now.
Oh, thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was great. We had great presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations.